Good pickup. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee meeting of Thursday, October 31st. We are holding today very seasonably in honor of the Remembrance period in our Legion, and I will call the meeting to order. Today we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. I'll look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda, that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for October 31, 2019 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover? You're out of costume now, Deputy Mayor.
I'm out of costume, yes. All business now.
Yeah. What was the story behind that?
This was the scariest costume that I could pull out of my closet this morning.
I didn't know you played golf.
That's right.
And the seconder, Councillor Doherty. I'll call the vote. All in favor? And it's carried unanimously. Any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we go through the agenda, please let us know and the general nature thereof. We'll get to deputations. And before we start on the deputations, I just had a few comments. I had the great pleasure this week of being down in Toronto at the UN Habitat, the Urban Economy Forum. Collingwood has entered into a pilot project with the UN Habitat Group for Sustainable Goal 11, which is to make communities that are safe, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. So it's an exciting initiative for us. But at that presentation, I had also had the great pleasure of listening to our Lieutenant Governor, Elizabeth Dowsell, and she made some very, I thought, compelling comments about community processes and sustainability. And what she said is that it's about collaboration and not competition. And what I took from that is that trying to have discussions in terms of moving forward at any level in a community discussion about sustainability and viability is that it's got to be a cooperative collaboration. It's not a competition. It's not a conflict. It's not an us and them scenario. It's a we scenario. And so what we do, hopefully around this table and with your assistance as members of the public, is have discussions about significant issues and how we can get to where we want to go together. So with that said, I will call the first deputation forward. It's 4.1, Water and Wastewater Rate Study Information Session. We have with us today a representative from Hempson Consulting. Good morning.
Good morning, my name is Andrew Ribella. I'm a senior consultant at Hempson. The purpose really of today's meeting is to provide council with an information on the water and wastewater rate study, which is currently ongoing. We're in kind of the early to mid phase of the assignment in this particular process, where we did want to give the opportunity here, provide an overview of what we're actually going to be talking about on a go-forward basis in regards to water and wastewater rates in the town of Collingwood and the purpose of our study, what our overall objectives are. So I will start off on this particular component just in terms of what our background are and our study objectives. We're going to do part of this process in our this presentation is be looking at a bit of a rate structure analysis, what our mandate is, and part of any water and wastewater rate study, there's a financial analysis component to it, obviously in order to set those rates. We're going to talk about some preliminary results and key observations. Everything that we have here in this presentation is still in draft form and for discussion purposes only, and will continue to be refined and looked at with municipal staff over the next month or so. And then afterwards, we'll just kind of be capping off with some next steps and where we're going to be going from this particular point and what our end goal is. So just to provide a bit of a background information here. So overall, generally, when we look at your water and wastewater rates, the town has been pretty fiscally prudent in the management of your water and wastewater services. You've been quite good at regular utility rate reviews, have undertaken and ensured that sufficient revenues are generated, obviously, to recover those costs. What's been happening here in the town of Collingwood, obviously, there's significant growth that's going to be anticipated over the next couple of years, in addition to substantial capital servicing costs, which was kind of one of the reasons which driven this particular study at this particular time. This timing of this study also coincides with the 5-year update. We did a water and wastewater rate study 5 years ago, we generally recommend that these studies be undertaken and reviewed every 3 to 5 years to ensure that your costs are matching your revenues and the rates that are in place are being properly adjusted to reflect what's been occurring and the growth that's taken place. In addition, asset management component is a really important piece of this, ensuring that you're funding your full life cycle costs of your assets, and we're putting enough money in reserves in order to sustain those assets over the long term. So with that asset management and that focal point kind of just speaking about here, a summary of your water and wastewater infrastructure, just obviously you're quite aware of it, but based on the town's asset management plan and adjusted for some of the infrastructure to current dollars, there's a total replacement value of your infrastructure of about $360 million, most of which is related to your wastewater system. And those numbers might be quite different from what you might see in your financial statements and your net book values, which is at about $78 million. Those are depreciated values and take into account the loss. And so when we look at asset management, it's really the replacement cost of that asset and how do we maintain them and ensure that they're providing the services in the proper way. Overall, when we look at that structure and the way your current rate structure is, you've certainly done a good job of maintaining your assets in that state of good repair and saving for future asset repair and replacement. So those are what you've kind of done quite good pace, and we just need to keep building on that on a go-forward basis in the town when we consider the rates and rate structures. So just to give a bit of an overview here in terms of what a total household user would pay for water and wastewater services in the town of Collingwood, just as a range of household users ranging from someone at a low volume user at around 120 cubic meters a year, all the way through to a high user around 500 cubic meters a year. And what you see is obviously the actual total quantum of the charge paid by any individual household would be different relative to the water use that they consume each year. So a lower volume user at 120 cubic meters a year would pay just over $1,000 each year, or a high volume user would pay over $1,600 each year, which is, again, for both water and wastewater services. But what the rate structure does tell us is that certainly residents have some sort of control over their water bill. If they conserve water, they would pay less. If they use more water, they would pay more based on the volumetric component. This does tell us, though, that the quantum and the difference in the delta between a low and high volume user in terms of the total bill, you see that a higher volume user at 500 cubic meters relative to one that's 120 cubic meter uses percentage-wise much more water, but the actual rate itself on what they pay is not 5 times as much more. So there is a portion of your bill here which is fixed and doesn't vary with the amount of volume used. And we're going to talk about that in the next couple of slides, and that's something that perhaps on a go-forward basis we are going to be looking at changing. So just in terms of, we did do a bit of a benchmark analysis to look at what municipalities around you, kind of Grey County, Simcoe County, and some others pay for water and wastewater services relative to the town of Collingwood. This is obviously quite a lot of information on one particular graph. I guess there's just, before I actually display what it's saying, there's a couple caveats obviously with this. Each individual jurisdiction provides water and wastewater services to meet the demands of their system and to fund their costs. So it isn't always an apple-on-apple comparison, recognizing this is just the total cost per household, and that's what the comparison is showing, but each individual community has their own servicing requirements, so, and their own individual and the rate structures and the cost of doing business. So that's one thing that we have to be cognizant of. But generally speaking, Collingwood's rates for a household consuming 200 cubic meters a year, including water and wastewater services, is kind of in the middle of the comparing municipalities. Certainly much less than those in the kind of the likes of Ramera or Meaford, but kind of on the kind of Wasaga Beach and Coburg and Blue Mountains is moderately lower than them. But so generally speaking, on the middle lane and less than the benchmark average, which is shown in green, which is kind of a few bars ahead of Collingwood. So in terms of what's the rates and what rates that are currently enforced, you are, I guess, kind of in that middle of the range of comparing communities. So just to remind everybody in terms of what the actual charges are currently for monthly water and wastewater rates, your rate structure is broken into 2 components. It's a fixed charge component and a consumption component. The fixed charge is differentiated by the size of the water meter and is charged per month. And again, that fixed charge would apply for both water services as well as for wastewater services. The consumption component is your variable rate, and the variable rate is charged only on the amount of water that's billed or metered at the end at the meter. On the water side, your residential charges are about 67 cents per cubic meter. And there is a summer consumption surcharge on that for any consumption in your summer months of over 40 cubic meters per month. And that would be set effectively almost double the total constant charge. And general services pays your standard rate of 67 cents per cubic meter. On the wastewater charge, it is a charge for both residential and general services on your consumption rate of 79 cents per cubic meter. So again, both of those components would be charged for each household or each user, and your fixed charge is obviously charged regardless of the amount of water consumed, and it's independent of water use. So as part of this process, we are going to be doing a bit of a rate structure review and looking at what rate structures are employed in other municipalities, what town Collingwood's rate structure is, and potentially looking at different ways that we can ensure that you do have the best structure for the town and what's applicable. So as part of our process, Tempson is going to be exploring a variety of different rate structures. And one of the key things that we will be looking at examining the fixed versus variable cost recovery relationship. And right now, as I mentioned, we have to be looking at how much your revenue, your current funds are recovered from your fixed charge relative to your variable rates and your variable rate cost recovery. And that will certainly have an impact in terms of what the total quantum at the end of the day if someone pays on their water bill, as their rate might be, or bill might be more dependent on volume, as opposed to the fixed charge, which would be independent of volume. And we're going to be evaluating, in addition to that, different pricing structures and examining different alternatives. Once we have a rate structure in place, certainly we're going to be calculating what those full cost recovery rates are relative to the existing rates under your status quo structure or other preferred alternative that we have come up with in discussion with staff. And once we have that, we'll be certainly testing those rate implications on various user groups. And obviously, anytime we make any rate structure adjustments or changes to that, there'll certainly be different implications of those rates on various user groups. And there's going to be winners or losers associated with each of those changes as we are shifting where the revenue is going to be recovered from. It's important to note that the total cost of providing the services does not change under each rate structure scenario. We have to be funding the same amount to provide the services. How we recover those costs from the different user groups will change. So that's why we have to do quite a bit of sensitivity test and analysis associated with this type of structure. So just a bit of an overview here in terms of our rate structure analysis, in terms of what we see in other communities. Certainly there's a flat rate component, which would be each user would pay the same fee regardless of the amount of water consumed. Oftentimes only associated with communities that are not metered. As a metered community, you would employ a fixed charge in addition to a variable rate structure of consumption component. So certainly that has some benefits from a funding standpoint, but certainly doesn't provide any benefits to the end user to conserve water and water conservation. The second one is a constant rate. Each user is charged a constant rate per unit of water consumed, so your dollar per cubic meter would be the same whether you use 10 cubic meters of water each year or 100 cubic meters of water each month. It's going to be the same rate regardless. The inclining block structure, effectively it's a tiered approach in which the unit price of water would increase relative to water use. So you have different structures and tiers for each block, and then as you move into the next block, there would be an increased charge per cubic meter associated with that. Effectively, this is definitely the most one that encourages conservation and increases equitability. Certainly has a kind of a disincentive to large non-residential users, as they would be paying more for water use as as volume increases as well. So we just have to be cognizant of that if that's a structure that we're looking to explore. In addition to when we get into there's the inclining, then there's obviously the declining block structure, effectively your tiered approach in which the unit price of water then would decrease relative to water use. So this would certainly more support high water users, may encourage some wasteful water use, but depending on the structure and how we do this, there can be ways to mitigate the impacts to only capture your non-residential group in the declining block, where your residential would be kind of stuck in the first block, which would not change, and your unit price per water would be maintained to capture all your household users. And that's effectively what number 5 is your humpback rate structure, a tiered approach in which the unit price of water would increase relative to use, and then it would retreat back to a lower charge in kind of the higher tier. So it would support a higher volume water user, but also have conservation efforts in the first couple tiers for your household users. And then the 6th one is just a seasonal rate, which is effectively what the town has in addition to a constant rate, which there's a surcharge a higher rate is employed for peak water use during peak times. This would encourage some sort of conservation, obviously, element. There's some public opposition, obviously, to that, just like there would be to some of the other inclining block structures. So I know that's quite a lot of information for it, but it does provide a bit of an overview in terms of what's out there in terms of different rates and rate structures, which we will be evaluating as part of this process. So just as thinking about those key rate structures and what we discussed, so what else are other municipalities in Ontario doing? So we did do a bit of a survey of municipalities across Ontario in terms of population ranging from 15 to 25,000 people, plus your direct neighbors in this analysis. So given the results here, about 60% of those communities employ that constant rate structure, which I discussed for your consumption-based component. Virtually all municipalities have the fixed charge that's levied in addition to your consumption rate. So everyone, the majority of those people in these communities are on that constant rate, which again is your charge per cubic meter, would stay constant for each volume of cubic meter of water bill. The reason behind that type of structure, generally it's pretty easy to understand and administer, and it definitely still has its conservation elements to it. The inclining and declining block, both respectively, are also kind of common in communities, and certainly the inclining block more so in this particular survey municipalities as well as your direct neighbors. So again, just kind of once we have that rate structure analysis done, we then get into, well, what the financial analysis and what are we actually looking at in terms of funding those costs, because now we know how we're going to structure our rate. So again, part of this process and part of this model here is looking at calculating user rates that are provided for the full operating and capital costs associated with providing services over the long term. The model is built over a 10-year time period. We can do kind of longer or shorter time frames associated with that, but certainly anytime after 10 years, the forecast starts to get a little bit more hazy, but certainly we try to focus on that 3 to 5 year interim period instead of set the rates over a 10-year period, so you do have a bit of a longer perspective of where the rates are going to be going. As part of this process, we are looking at setting aside monies and intend to continue with your existing practice in reserves to fund the full life cycle costs of the long-term repair and replacement of infrastructure. Again, we've got over $360 million worth of assets that are required to service the community, and for water and wastewater services, we need to be ensuring that we have sufficient funds in order to do that on an ongoing basis. Examine the impacts of implementing the newly calculated rates, again, on the residents and businesses of the town. So anytime we do these types of things, we look at the range of households with different non-residential impacts and users, what those rate effects mean to them on a total annual basis. And then when we're looking at it, we just need to make sure that there is consideration for equity factors and cost recovery and all the different elements that ensure that the rate structure is transparent and easy to be administered from a municipal standpoint, while ensuring that we're balancing that against all the costs that we need to recover for. So just to provide a bit of an overview here of some of the trends that we are seeing, certainly in terms of growth, the town has had some fairly rapid growth in recent years. About 25% increase in population, 10% increase in employment, and a kind of steady increase in your households over that period. Obviously, expectation is that over at least the short to medium term, there's going to be a continued increase in pressure on the population side and the household side with new growth anticipated and to meet our targets on the growth plan. Why that's important is there's obviously, given that we've had such an increase in population over the time and an increase in employment, it's interesting that when we look at from a rate setting perspective, we have to look at total billed consumption and what's actually billed in terms of water use and wastewater use. And actually total billed consumption has been declining in recent years, and that's quite similar to what we've seen in virtually all Ontario municipalities really across the country. There's declining per capita consumption trends, and industries and businesses are actually changing their consumption patterns in order to be more conservation and environmentally friendly, and they're changing out their appliances and uses. So it's kind of the opposite of what's actually happening on the population employment side. Those consumption trends are actually trending downward. Residential kind of data has been a bit more variable, but given that we've seen 25% increase in population growth, we're actually seeing kind of pretty static, if not declining, residential consumption, which so on a whole is coming down. And that's very important from a rate setting perspective, because we have to take those types of trends into account on our forecast to ensure that we're actually setting our rates to recover the revenues taken into associated with providing those services. So it is an interesting point, and again, not uncommon of what we've seen across the country and across other municipalities in Ontario. So what are our preliminary findings here based on some of the modeling that we've done? And again, we're going to be working with the town on finalizing a lot of our key assumptions here. But as I mentioned, the town currently has a consumption charge, fairly constant on the rate side, but then it does have a surcharge for your summer months. And we're actually seeing is very little water is actually built in that second tier, that summer consumption charge, which almost kind of begs the question in terms of from our rate structure review, if those are the types of things that we need to look at from an administrative standpoint, perhaps removing. The second point here is your town actually generates nearly 80% of your total revenue from the fixed charge. So only a very small component of your total revenue, your total consumption charge is made up of those costs. So we really, there's obviously from a revenue stability standpoint, when you have most of your revenue from a fixed charge component, it has a lot of revenue security with it and stable cash flow, although the higher ratio limits to what the end user can save from water consumption. That being said, there's very good reason as to why the town in recent years have had a high proportion of your fixed charge. You've had quite a lot of cost on the wastewater side, and there's quite a lot more to come in the next coming years. But perhaps now with meters in place for some time, there's opportunities here to evaluate some different rate structure and evaluate that relationship between your fixed cost and your variable rate recovery. And this rate study is obviously an opportunity here to provide and explore those different opportunities. And that's what we're going to be doing as part of this process. And we'll be coming back to council with what those actual explicit results are of our review. So just as an overall preliminary status quo assessment here, generally speaking, I think I've said it a couple of times, the town is in fairly a good fiscal standing when it comes to your water and wastewater operations. We generally see here the water and wastewater rates based on our preliminary observations that the rates should be adjusted on average, kind of in the rate at least to keep up with the rates of inflation at around 3%, upwards to a kind of a 6% increase per annum, relative to how we want to proceed with our asset management contributions and how we kind of funding for some of those big infrastructure projects that are kind of looming out 10 years from now. And then obviously these types of rate increases at this particular time will ensure that sufficient funds are available to deliver these services and carry out the capital program that staff has identified, both from an asset management perspective as well as from a growth perspective, to fund and facilitate some of those projects. So just in terms of some of our next steps here, I think we have the staff to review and provide a report on rate structure options, and we're going to be working with staff with that over the next month or so. Hence, we'll be finalizing our rate model and assumptions in operation with town staff to come back to council on November 28th with a complete analysis and formal kind of recommendations regarding on that matter. Pending the kind of the outcomes and the results of that meeting on the November 28th, there's a preference to have the rate bylaw adopted before year end, but pending on if we're adjusting the rate structure or making any kind of significant changes to that, there may be some public consultation that's warranted, and that bylaw could then be pushed kind of in the early to the new year to be passed. So there is some time to make some adjustments to that, but it really would kind of be beneficial to see what those results are before we kind of plan that final path forward. So that's the end of my presentation. I realize you got a busy agenda on here, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have this far.
Thank you very much for that. Although this is a deputation, this item is not on the agenda, so before I ask council for questions, I will go to the public for any questions or comments. Please come forward. See that, and then I'll look around the table.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, do you assume that all water use flows through the sewage system?
So through council, wastewater is not billed individually, metered individually, so
Right.
any water use is assumed on the sewer side.
Okay,
Only for
so
those
grass watering then, the water that's used for grass watering gets combined in that fee structure, correct? Thank you.
And just to add on that, sewer usage is metered in virtually no communities in Ontario or across the country. It's very difficult to do that. So the most common practice is to measure based on water.
Yes, come on forward, please. Oh, great, thanks, Roger.
John McGarry. I didn't hear anywhere in the presentation what proportion of new residential or commercial development is covered in its own, it covers its own cost. You understand the same?
Yeah, so, through the mayor and the chair, we are looking through those as part of the rate structure analysis, but generally speaking, we look at providing the services as a total cost, and then it gets delineated between your water, between your residential and your non-residential users, and it doesn't look at who's subsidizing who. It's just a kind of a cost recovery and the total cost of providing that service. But as part of this process, we are looking at what the growth is in both residential and non-residential and how that affects the rates.
Yes, Mr. Powell? George, can you just state
Mayor,
it for us?
George Powell.
Thank you.
The question I would ask is we currently service, provide water to other communities, right? How is that going to be looked at in terms of the rate structure?
Through the mayor and through the chair, the agreements that are currently underway to providing services to the town of Tecumseh and the town of Collingwood, and as part of the upgrades to the treatment plants, are going to be looked at and reviewed relative to the agreement that's in place that we have to follow in terms of the costs that are provided in there, and the revenues are based on the allocations. We'll have to ensure that those costs are being brought in kind of similar manner to offset the total cost of providing the service. So it is accounted for as a revenue line item, but we have to just be consistent with the agreements.
Any other questions from the public? Yes.
This report may be quite timely when our group does present the terminal development of the waterfront. There's obviously a considerable impact to the wastewater and water supply to that project if it does come to fruition. And we'll be covering that in more detail when we do our presentation.
No other questions from the public, and I will turn to council. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Two quick questions. One was specific to the incline-decline we're talking about. Is that something that would be looked at on a per-industry class, or could it be actually looked at as a specific incentive to a particular business?
Through the mayor, so it would be looked at, generally speaking, the rate structure would be put in for all users, and it wouldn't be on a case-by-case basis. Unless, sorry, I guess I should caution that, if certain agreements were like other municipalities with large, very large industrial users, certain agreements have been put in place, which are separate from, but the rate structure we're talking about is more uniform, and it would be applied across the town.
Maybe a follow-up specific to that question. We as a municipality have very few tools within our basket to incentivize business to relocate or start within the community. So when a rate study or when the new rates are established, and you mentioned a 5-year time frame, if 2 years down the road there's an opportunity to bring in somebody who is a heavy user perhaps, and being cognizant of environmental concerns, can that be adjusted at that time as part of an incentive package?
Through the merit, so rate study is recommended on a 3 to 5 year time frame. If there is warrant to update the study earlier, the municipality and the town can do that. And again, to look at those rate structures, but generally speaking, it wouldn't be adjusting the rate structure to accommodate one particular user. If that's the case, it could be done by a separate agreement. But that there's nothing against the town reviewing earlier to review the rate structure at any particular time.
And if I may, Mayor Saunders, a separate question. Other municipalities have implemented this, but I think that they've implemented more because of the shortage of access to water. It's something that we don't necessarily have an issue, but we do again have to be cognizant of. Was there any consideration, or has there been consideration in the past to a luxury, I'm going to call it or refer to it as a luxury rate, that would apply to things like pools? We're seeing a lot of, I'm going to call them cosmetic amenities that not necessarily are used purpose other than, from an aesthetic standpoint? Any consideration to a surcharge for something like that?
Through the mayor, so that would really be capturing the purpose of an inclining block structure. Could be used to capture that, where those high water users who would have to fill their pool or water their grass and wash their cars more than regular, and want to do that, then they would be paying more for that water use than someone who's just using it for simple household use. And that's where that inclining block structure captures those higher volume users, and they would be paying for that increased service and the demand that they're placing on the system.
Mayor Saunderson, appreciating that we're just receiving this as a deputation, perhaps we could revisit this at some, that is the last question.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Through you, Mr. Chair. How much weight are you in the creation of the report to come to us next month? Are you giving to conservation versus equity versus cost recovery? I understand cost recovery is obviously the primary driver, but are you weighting these particular considerations in any particular way?
Through the mayor, not on a scientific basis, so we have percentage weighted on it, but we are looking at all those factors in order to devise or come up with an appropriate rate structure for you. And certainly different rate structures promote different levels of conservation. So we are trying to see what could be balanced against making sure that we're providing enough incentive to provide conservation efforts, but ensuring that we are that we have enough of a rate structure in place to ensure that the costs are being recovered properly. So we are kind of have to balance all those factors when we do come back with you.
But you are keeping that in consideration.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Madden.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. Just first a comment. Benchmarking the analysis cost per typical household, I noticed later on in the presentation that you, in the rate structure that you did mention New Tecumseh. I would just be interested, as we are the service for them, what their cost per typical household would be, because I didn't see that. But I don't need that right now.
No, sorry, I actually thought it was on that list, but I guess it might not be, so we will get that for you, yeah.
Oh, well,
No, you're right. Okay, that's a fair point. We can just bring that back.
thank you very much. And secondly, maybe to go off Deputy Mayor, you had mentioned that very little water was billed in the second tier, i.e. the summer months. So that would be when you water your grass, when you fill up your pool. If we could get a number on that.
So I have a number.
Okay.
It's less than 1% of your total consumption.
Okay.
The number serves around 40,000 cubic meters, I thought it was, but it was 0.5% of your total consumption is what it was. But,
Okay, so what would, wow.
yeah.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
I will refine my, I know it was 0.5% and 40,000, around 40,000 brings it out. So.
Thank you. Thank you. So very little is used in the summer months, i.e. it says of
Over that threshold, yes.
over that threshold of watering the grass and filling pools and such. Okay.
Because that's only capturing what's built above that. So that's what that's representing.
Thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. So, thank you very much through you to our speaker. And following up on Councillor Madigan's question about consumption in New Tech, are our future capital needs, as you've outlined, incorporating the negotiated fees that New Tech will be paying for bulk water and also contributing to capital improvements?
So through the mayor and the chair, the intention, we do need to consider all that. We have done some at this particular level, but the terms of the agreement are still being concluded and finalized, and we're working on making sure that all those proper costs and the allocations of the agreement are included in the rate study. That's the intention.
Thank you.
Director McDonald.
Sorry if I can add to that. Certainly the agreements we're working on, the capital cost for the plant expansion will be 100% borne by New Tecumseh. So moving forward in terms of our rate, the rates that we will develop with New Tecumseh will be based on their consumption costs as well as ongoing operation and maintenance costs into the future. So that will be all included in the agreement that we're currently negotiating with Newcombe. And it's in the existing agreement as well in terms of their the capital component. So when you look at our rate, we have a capital component as part of our rate, but that's our cost to upgrade the plant, maintain our pipes. They do not have that capital component in our rate that we charge them because they are actually paying for the capital to upgrade and build the plant.
Well, Councillor Thur.
Thank you, and through you to Director McDonald. So the capital needs, the $360 million, is incorporating new tech capital contributions, or that would be over and above?
That's our total capital assets. The total capital assets that we own is $360 million. So that's all our pipes, our pumping stations, our treatment plants. That's everything that we own.
Okay, thank you. Misunderstood that number. Thanks.
Councillor Hanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I just wanted to comment on the fact that we have very little water consumption in the summer. And my own view, and I'll just share it, is that the policy is working, and that generally residents are not watering their grass and having high water use in the summer because it's generally known the rates are very high. And in fact, last summer I was speaking to a couple that had just moved into town in the spring. They watered their grass, put all the seed down, and then got their first bill and put the sprinkler in the gulch. So I just wanted to offer that.
Any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through you to our presenter. One of the original slides that were comparing our neighboring municipalities, and your comment was that we weren't necessarily comparing apples with apples, but this inquiring mind can't help but ask how they do that, the ones that are less than us. And so what would be some of those factors that doesn't make it apples to apples? I know I kind of had three in my mind, but I don't know if they're the ones.
Yeah, through the mayor, through the chair. So, you know, certainly there's just maybe perhaps economies of scale and the distribution system and the actual plant and the cost of providing that services to the community might just be less. So there's varying factors in terms of the infrastructure that's required, where perhaps some of them are on their asset life cycle reserves, whether the infrastructure is newer, or perhaps what kind of capital costs are out there in the future, where if the system is newer and you don't need any capital works or major replacements, then they can certainly operate the system at a much more streamlined level than perhaps other communities. So those are the types of things, but there are obviously other, perhaps more engineering related answers that the town could provide, but that's from a financial perspective, at least at a high level.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of probably maybe a different mix in terms of who they're serving. You said the age of their infrastructure, so maybe they're being less aggressive in terms of their reserves. Okay, is that kind of a decision?
Could be some of those, but again, it's also to your point on the mix of users and who's actually using the services, and the mix of residential versus non-residential users. Those all kind of play into it.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Sorry, may I piggyback to the question? Would a key differentiator not be looking at the communities that were sort of to the right of Collingwood? The majority of them, they're all community-based well, as opposed to the system similar to ours.
That's correct.
The two on the chart that sort of came out as consistent comparators, I think, would be Owen Sound and Barrie. The others were more rural in that respect.
Right, and then obviously how the delivery of services, and again, that's to the point of the engineering, there might be some technical reasons as to why and how that's processed, right?
Seeing no more questions, thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you and seeing the outcome in November.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have the petition to preserve the terminals. We have Bing Jolly and George Daniels. I'll ask them to come forward, please.
Good morning.
Morning, Bing.
Mayor Sanderson, Mayor, Deputy Mayor Hall, members of council. We're here this morning representing Collingwood Terminal Harvard Action Group, representing signatures for over 8,000 concerned citizens and tourists requesting restoration and repairs to this building. This historic tourist landmark and has immediate short-term repairs as requested by Tacoma engineers in 2018. We all know this will cost money. We all know our waterfront is our only real tourist attraction that brings money into this town. The terminal is part of every picture and every background. Previous councils were very remiss in this most popular waterfront as far as picking up money and remuneration. We have, on our terminals, we have 85-foot towers, we have 100-foot towers with over 30,000 square feet of roof, plus an elevator to bring these servicemen up and down. You can't get that type of accommodation anyplace else in the province. We are charging and collect $35,000 a year, and we spend close to $80,000 of that. This figure should be far further ahead in this. These tenants are definitely not paying what they should be. It's a small amount, but it's what brings this whole project together. I would like to this time just say one thing about two ladies that collected over 8,000 signatures and talked to a lot of the tourists that we have in this town and why they were here. And these tourists came to see our waterfront and what it had to offer. These ladies are Marianne Dines, whose her uncle, Frank Hank, was the sold the terminals to the town in 1997 with the assumption it would be preserved and for future use. 20 years later, nothing has been done. Donna White, the third generation of commercial fishermen from this town, whose family used the landmark for navigation for thousands of other mariners and pilots for decades. I feel very strongly that the new council should take a hold of this project and make a proper decision to look after this landmark. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to our presenter, Mr. George Daniels. I just might say that George's wife was here with him, and they have been, her family has been here since 1890. And it gives you a good example of the people here that are dedicated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bing. Mayor Saunderson, Deputy Mayor, Council, media guests, thank you very much for this opportunity. On the screen, you can read faster than I can talk, so I will highlight some of the items. The first item is this group, which Bing has chaired. We came up with the name Collingwood Terminals and Harbor Action Group, and we have a positioning statement. It's worth saving these heritage waterfront landmarks. That's our theme. And so the purpose of this presentation is to show you why the terminals and associated services are vital to the preservation of our asset. So in this presentation, we have slides and photos. We have immediate terminal repair priorities. We're recommending that in 2020, the terminal services include installations of sewer, water main, hydro, and any proposed developer co-partnering for what should be mixed use proposals, including some combination of residential, commercial, office, tourist, hospitality elements, restaurants, etc., all part of negotiations going forward. So where are we? Well, this is a map of the town of Collingwood Building Department showing the entire Heritage District. And of course, our terminal is right here at the end of the Heritage driveway. So that's where it is. And so it's precious. Let's look at what Bing referred to as the purchase by the town in 1987. The town paid $550,000 for the building. If you go to your website and you look at just inflation rate escalators, that dollar is now worth $880,000. And if you go to a real estate escalator, which I did, I was very pleasantly surprised to see that large structures on the waterfront are anywhere from $2.5 to $3 million. We're not recommending you sell the terminal to generate that money. Furthermore, we're recommending that whatever you do with it, you use it as a revenue generator in any negotiation going forward. But the real issue is on a brand index basis, the terminals have been one of the vital parts of the Collingwood brand over the years, just as importantly as is the town clock, the lighthouse, whether it's the town of Collingwood marketing department positioning the community. The terminals often show up, whether it's free enterprise and individual companies talking about Collingwood. They talk about the Collingwood brand is. So we're submitting that the brand index of the terminal is basically priceless. That's really what's going on here. We have a priceless asset, so let's look after it. So Bing referred to the engineering drawing that took the engineering study that was done and commissioned by the town in 2017, and the basic findings from that was that from a macro perspective, the structure is sound. The structure is sound. We have another indicator of the importance of this, that when the community got behind the Collingwood waterfront plan several years ago, they identified that it is essential for a phase 2, which will focus on implementing infrastructure to support motorized boating and marine services on the pier. I think later on you're going to hear from Gary Korlick, where he's going to tell you about the importance of all of these services around the harbor on a separate little presentation this morning. So that was the Collingwood Waterfront Master Plan calling for let's make it work. Here is an artist's drawing coming back from 1997. And it shows the Port of Collingwood plan. It's a terrific rendering. Shows how the boats could come in here. We've isolated or itemized out here our asset infrastructure, and it needs sewer, water, mains, and hydro, and they would come along here. So to dispel any myths that may surround the discussion that is the terrain stable enough to hold everything? Of course it is, because all the research shows that in a typical year for decades, 30 trains with cars and big locomotives came from the grain elevators down the railway line, 30 of them a year, weighing 25 tons each, and that didn't even include the trucks. So this is a good look at going back a few decades of what should happen. So let's have a look at our support team, and our committee here has been very well augmented by Andrew Winters. And, oh, excuse me, I'm going too fast here. Employing a drone and having a look at the terminals from the air, this is what you see, so you can have some pretty good views here. And of course, the towers that Bing referred to on the top of the structure are vital to your device that you have now, your computer that you have now, your telephone that you have now, the television that you watch at home. It's part of the Internet of Things. So these towers are very, very precious to our community. And we don't want them to leave the community because they would go to the next highest place, which is over in another jurisdiction. And if they're only generating about $37,000 a year of revenue, but it's costing us $80,000, then obviously somebody's got to look at the rent structure and renegotiate that to the town's favor, because those telecommunication broadcast towers are an important part of the Bell, Rogers, OPP, hospital, and all these other folks doing business in this community. So let's work with them to get a responsible revenue back in there. So here's another view.
George, I'm just going to give you a time check here.
Okay.
A 3-minute mark, so 3
Okay.
minutes to go. And if you want Mr. Corley to speak,
Okay.
make sure we have time for him.
Okay, so going forward, there's a view from the top of the one of the towers. You can see the Blue Mountain in the background. Bing referred to the yes vote, 8,000 signatures. You've got a bunch of those that Bing could show you. That's a pretty solid vote in favor of retaining the terminals. That's what the sign-up sheet looks like. That particular one is the committee. We all signed that. And I think what's really significant here as well is we've got the support of the Collingwood chapter of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. Now, you all have copies of that, and that's the conclusion, but I would like to read the center paragraph of that where they go on to say the Collingwood grain elevators serve as a cultural icon. They represent an important part of Collingwood's history. The terminals remind us of a time when Great Lakes ships docked in our harbor. They remind us of the contribution of so many shipyard workers. They contribute to giving us a sense of place in our community. Signed, Margaret Boyd, President, on behalf of the Board of Directors of ACO Collingwood, and we thank Margaret for that. So we're requesting an urgent implementation now on phase 1 remediation repairs to protect the terminal. Investment is recommended by Tacoma Engineers in 2018. And we are also saying that in 2020, let's invest some money from the excess revenues the town must have in a reserve fund from the sale of the Cullis, the railway line, and the airport, which the media reported is over $15 million. So you've got some dollars you could use to put this infrastructure in place. Putting a sewer line and water mains out there would be like candy to a developer. That would be a vital part of your negotiations of bringing them on board. And then you could back charge them with those costs. So there's our presentation, Mr. Mayor and Council. We appreciate your time and look forward to you implementing this program.
Thank you. Council, any questions or comments for the presenters? We very much appreciate your input and all your hard work. Thank you to you and your committee.
Thanks very much, Mayor Sarkis.
So that's it for deputations. Item 5 is the consent agenda. 5.1 is the ACO letter in support of preserving the grain terminals that was referred to by Mr. Daniels in his presentation. We need a motion to receive that. Yes, okay, so can I get a motion to receive the item, Councillor Jeffrey, seconded by Councillor McLeod. All in favor? Any comments or questions about the letter, Council? And that takes us to staff reports. And the first staff report we have is very timely. It's CC 2019-01 Grain Terminals Next Steps Proposed White Paper for Public Input. And I'll ask Sonia to take it away.
Sorry, Mayor, I'm saying, for one moment. I apologize to all who are here. In a twist of irony, I showed up in a hockey costume. I have a son that was just injured in hockey this morning. I'm going to step away and deal with it.
Sorry to hear that. Yes, absolutely.
Anyways, my apologies.
Thank you, Your Worship. Typically, a presenter would go to the lectern, but having talked with you earlier, I think this may be a good spot to see the council and the attendees from My name is Sonia Skinner. I'm a staff person with the municipality, executive director of community service and corporate services. And in my portfolio would fall the facilities portion of the staff's work, which is why I'm going to talk to you about this today. And I would like to actually introduce very briefly that I've been doing this in collaboration with Director Dean Culver, who's here, and my staff, Dave McNulty, and his staff, Adam Gallant, that are here, and others have supported this, as well as finance and public works, etc. I do think that for this, the terminals, as you can even hear from the deputations you've already received today, that we do need to go on a bit of a journey together. That both the public and council and staff all need to be aware of the complex challenges and the need to find the absolute best opportunities that we can. And confirm and possibly even, maybe I speak only for myself, mature our understanding and what we're ready to hear. So before I get into the purpose, I wanted to briefly tell you what a white paper is. And white papers are typically inform a reader concisely about a complex issue to help them solve a problem or make a decision. And it does have a dual role. It presents some government policies or local government policies, while at the same time inviting opinions upon those policies. And they're a tool of participatory democracy, not an unalienable policy commitment. So we've set out what we think. However, the purpose of them is in fact to solicit information. So the purpose is quite straightforward. It's set out in the proposed motion to council. It's that we would receive support today for staff to undertake a public consultation on a white paper prior to final consideration of the process and next steps. And that after the public consultation, an updated document would be brought back for decision on those next steps. It is not intended that we would make a decision on the actual future of the terminals today through this meeting or through any votes today. On the third slide, I just wanted to set out at a high level the challenges. So the challenges that have been put in front of council and in front of us all is that council has resolved 2 times in the last 2 years that staff provide options to make a decision on the terminals. I think we all recognize, and it was highlighted today, that deterioration will impact our ability to preserve. For example, if the roof membranes were substantially worse and there was a lot of water damage, it would mean that things would get exponentially more expensive if we wanted to preserve. Council has made a number of decisions that have resulted in reduced debt for the town. And this is very important, as you had heard actually a water and wastewater rate study earlier today as well, which is quite timely. But in general, with respect to roads, with respect to buildings, with respect to a lot of things that the town is doing, we need continued vigilance on our capital shortfall. And there is a section in the white paper talking about the town's overall financial position. Generally, we have at least 5 million if we were to demolish the terminals, which is being carried as 8 million on our books, considering a contingency, and at least 10 million to preserve the terminals. And that would be just the outside and the roof and what you would look at, not renovations of the inside. So our challenge, we're a town that's open for business. We do need to find within or beyond our Collingwood boundaries innovative businesses who have a vision for our terminals that will both enhance their own business, potentially in gorgeous flagship location, providing us still with a green public waterfront that's in line with Collingwood's aesthetic and our history. So this is a bit of the lingo. I was asked in the report, there's a few pieces that some people were or were not familiar with. I'll start with the right picture, the one that's at the front of the website and is very similar to the Terminals and Harbour Action Group photo. The Marine Tower is the one on the left or the west end. This is the one where we have the bird dropping problem. It's been estimated at about $2 million to clean that up. Whether the terminals stay or don't, that would still require cleanup. There's some challenges there because the windows don't have a floor underneath them. So you're looking at, for example, replacing windows to keep the birds out that are tens and hundreds of feet above the ground. Above all of the silos, there's one floor, often called the bin floor. In my own mind, I want to call it the bin ceiling, but it is called the bin floor above the silos, and the shipping towers on the east side. I'm going to move to the other picture now. At the end of the spit, there's a confined disposal facility. That is a place where, when the harbor was dredged, some of the material was put. There's the terminals themselves, and at the east end, there's two buildings. At the very east end, there's a current sales school, and sandwiched between it and the terminals themselves is the old rail shed. The Collingwood Yacht Club is closest to the terminals, and the public marina is south of that, closer to town. And right at the base of the spit, there's some private lands which are slated for future development and could be part of our larger overall town picture of what's happening in that area. Pardon me. Next slide, please. So, there are many possible physical end states and uses for this site. Everything from no terminals and a park to the terminals used as they've been in other jurisdictions as art galleries and everything in between. The council and the community should have a common set of objectives, and staff have proposed that these would include exploring all the physically responsible options to preserve the terminals, considering the ongoing maintenance, and some figures for that were mentioned earlier, as well as the periodic rehabilitations. So the one that's coming up right now, the engineering report estimated at about 10 million. Assuming that that was completed, we would still then need to also have in mind that some years, 15 or 20 years past that, we would also need another large renovation, rehabilitation. So we would have to plan for that. We need to seek investors or partners, whether they be commercial or not-for-profit or social enterprise, for that repurposing. We need, in any case, to respect and celebrate the historic significance of the terminals and the shipyards, and to retain public access. So the draft white paper further sets out the mandatory and desirable objectives. And in part, with the proposed white paper consultation, we want to garner council's and our community's input to make sure that we have a good and well-described set of objectives of what we're trying to achieve together. You've heard today, and I don't think anybody who's driven through downtown Collingwood would think otherwise, that the terminals themselves are an iconic symbol of our history. The pictures that you see here are both from inside the terminals building this summer. One's from the taller eastern tower looking down onto the roof, and the other one's across that bin floor, or the bin ceiling as I call it, looking at that space that's in there. They can be redeveloped. Other jurisdictions have done so successfully. The costs have been very high in those jurisdictions, and it would bear doing more case study work to look at what the costs and benefits are. What we have not done, and I would like to have more information on, is what has happened in jurisdictions where they have successfully rebuilt on iconic sites. There's many knowns and many unknowns. When you, and I hope you will, have a chance to look through the white paper, the proposed draft white paper, the things that we know include that we have a confined disposal facility, the yacht club, a lease with the Collingwood Yacht Club, the zoning. It is part of the downtown heritage district, and we have some ongoing bare minimum maintenance and operations. What we don't know includes things like the status of the foundation. It's over 4,000 timber piles, we understand, but we haven't been able to fully understand their condition. The hydro, water, and sewer services and what it would take to financially bring those as far as the terminals, including potentially raising the road to make sure that we had full season access. Opportunities to enhance or move the telecommunications equipment that is currently on the roof. The results of the public engagement on the asset sale proceeds that were mentioned. For example, the airport and the public utility. All the regulatory requirements, our duty to consult with the Indigenous groups in our area that are or have been in our area, and a full, balanced, complete set of public opinion. We do know that there's a large contingent here today that have already spoken. We haven't spoken broadly with everyone in our community. Potentially allowable uses that council would find acceptable, and impacts like traffic. Next slide, please. And the meat of this report really talks about what are our process options to reach a decision. If we do this right, we're going to end up with something we love, that is a piece of or provides a tribute to our history. If only we could confidently jump to knowing we have the exact perfect something, it would be wonderful, but we can't make that leap. So we have three options that are set out in the white paper that we'd like to talk about. These options, or potentially a hybrid of them, can be used to move toward council's decision. And briefly, these include seeking funded proposals for evaluation and decision. And under this approach, what we would do is similar to an expression of interest and a request for proposal, where we would be seeking public-private partnerships or social enterprises or anyone who had a funded end state for those terminals to put in a proposal. Under this, it sounds like a procurement, but it's something a little bit different than a procurement in the sense that we would be providing a well-evaluated set of alternatives for council to make a decision on. It wouldn't necessarily be the lowest cost price or the highest scored price. It would be a transparent decision by council about the future for this site. There's some pros and cons on that one. One of the commitments in this would be the need for some consultants to advise us on the public-private partnership type work. Option B is to proceed now with the environmental remediation of the Western Marine Tower, to set up a steering committee and to start doing more investigation on our unknowns and opportunities. And option C would be to seek business opportunities for the square footage that's most readily available, such as the East End Sailing School, potentially that top bin floor above the silos, and even one of the towers. So the full execution of these, or a hybridization of these, may take several years to complete, and meanwhile we would need to maintain the minimum maintenance and operations to ensure the health and safety of staff, etc. And I'd like to thank several past colleagues for their wise advice on P3, site reuse, white papers, and other input that I've had and my staff have had in creating the options. Finally, in the last slide, next steps. So should the committee today endorse circulating this white paper, the next steps that could happen include a news release on the committee's decision and the consultation opportunities that will be upcoming, and further promotion of the opportunity quite broadly in community and commercial forums. We would post the draft white paper on our vibrant, engaged Collingwood site that I would encourage everyone to visit in any case. We would have interactive public town hall engagement sessions in late 2019, at least an afternoon and an evening option, so people with different commitments would be able to participate. And we would meet with interested commercial and community parties upon their request, returning to this committee early in 2020. To conclude, with the endorsement of this committee and through this white paper, we would kick off a two-way dialogue with and beyond our community, and we would be very pleased to hear your thoughts and questions about this approach to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I will now open the floor if there's any comments from the public about the white paper and the presentation you just heard. Please come forward and state your name and give us your thoughts.
I would like to know where you come up with $2 million in some dirt job. That's such an unreal figure. I've never heard anything like it in my life.
Can I get your name, please?
Yes, Donna White. I would like to know where you could come up with $2 million to clean up some bird droppings that are supposed to be, say, yay feet high. Where do you come up with those figures?
We'll look to staff. I think that number comes from the assessment done by the engineering firm, Dr. McDonald.
Through your worship, yes, that information comes from our consultant, and there's an extensive amount of bird droppings, but it's the access to those bird droppings. That tower, if you can go to one of them, that tower is 10 stories high. It has no floor. The bird droppings are all the way up in that tower. They have to have it containment. There are additional environmental issues within. There's asbestos and there's other things. So it's not just the bird droppings. That cost includes other environmental issues that have to be dealt with. There's asbestos paneling used throughout the building. There's other things in addition to the bird droppings, but that cost does come from our consultant. And it's a big project. It's not in an isolated area. It's very complicated in terms of how you'd have to access the material.
Thank you, Director McDonald. I think it's to add to that. It's one of the unique challenges this building poses for us. You may recall about 10 years ago we had an opportunity to have paint donated to paint the building, and the costs were going to be around $150,000. My understanding is the Ministry of Environment came in and told us we had to drape the entire building to prevent paint spray from getting into the water, and it then became a $1.5 million endeavor 10 years ago. So part of the challenges of this building is that moving forward it's very unique, and based on its location there are a number of challenges that would not be common to a building in downtown. Any other comments? Yes, go ahead, sir. Please state your name.
Lindsay Lyle. Is it working now?
Yes.
Lindsay Lyle. I was shocked to read in the white report that the town has, I believe, a 30-year agreement with the yacht club for only $15,000 a year. Is there any escalation clauses in that contract? And secondly, did council authorize and approve that contract?
We'll look to Director Culver.
Thank you, Worship. The yacht club lease was established decades ago and didn't contain any termination clauses. At the point when the renewal came about, unfortunately the document, all the renewal components of the document essentially were non-negotiable in that renewal. The only negotiation was for the rate of lease, and it had an arbitration clause in it as well that said it would be based on basically what market rates. So staff put together a market rate analysis, and that's where the $15,000 per year came from, based on other similar situations in other municipalities. And unfortunately, there is no termination clause, but it is an ongoing document.
Thank you, Director Culver.
Thank you, Doug. My name is Gary Horlick. I'm part of the community group for the terminals. I submitted earlier to all council members a 4-page document, which I'd like to become part of the dissertation on the terminal buildings. And it more focuses on the benefits of these waterfront initiatives and just adding to the presentation that George and Bing did earlier. Thank you.
We'll make sure that the handout gets included with the documents for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim Fryer. The cost that Director McDonald just talked about, is that applicable whether there's restoration or demolition? Is it the same cost for both to do the environmental cleanup?
Sonia or Director McDonald, or who? Sorry, Executive Director, Senior.
Those costs are necessary whether you keep it or tear it down. You have to deal with the environmental issues before you tear it down. You can't tear it down and not allow those to get into the environment. And if you want to use it, you do have to get rid of them. So that's a cost regardless of what you choose to do.
Thank you. Last call for comments from the public.
First of all, I question the $15,000 a year from the yacht club. That is what they're letting is a 2-acre fenced place on waterfront, and that's less than what you could rent a house for in Collingwood. This does not seem reasonable, and to tie it up for that length of time is not reasonable. On top of that, I have got a personal quote on redoing the roof on this building by the same firm that did the roof on our arena, and that ran around $700,000 to $800,000, not $12,000 to $15,000. On top of that, our local paint supplier has already said that they would supply the paint when and if this ever comes about to the tune of $50,000. The price to do that roof or that paint job before, when you had to use scaffolding and there was no way of cleaning up the mess. Today, in this day and age, with the type of paint we've got, the way we can apply it, and with somebody donating the paint, this is something that's going to be pre-sold by the company that's going to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comments, so.
Yeah, one more, please.
All right.
My question is it feasible that Bill Reddick, by the way, Collingwood, been here forever, probably gonna die soon. My question is, would it be possible that in your committee, you incorporate 1 or 2 people from our group? There seems to be a lot of discrepancy in the figures and how they came about. And I'm wondering if they could be appointed to sit with your committee.
Well, this is a strategic initiatives committee, which is council members working with staff. But certainly moving forward, there's options at looking at doing that. Right now, what we're doing today is mapping the way forward and having a discussion what that would look like. There will be an abundance of public consultation. And so whether you're actually formally part of the committee, we will be considering your input, absolutely.
Thank you.
Any more? All right, I will now turn to council. Questions and comments around the table? All right, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have 2 comments. One is a question, actually, and it's in regard to unknowns. Among the unknowns, have we incorporated questions about the integrity of the containment facility for the harbour dredgings?
Executive Director.
Through you, Chair. Actually, that's a very good point. We have not examined in any detail the containment facility other than having knowledge that it's there. We'll make note of that.
Thank you. And my second comment is just a number of comments from the public in regard to the rental rate for the marina facility, and I must say that I am in agreement that perhaps that rate is artificially low. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, before we move forward with any other comments, I will get this item on the table, so I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder. So CC 2019-1 grain terminals next steps, proposed white paper for public input. The recommendation is that the standing committee receive Collingwood Grain Terminal's draft white paper and support that staff undertake a public consultation on it prior to final consideration of the process and next steps towards the decision. Can I get a mover and a seconder? So moved by Councillor Hamlin, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, I just would like to Councillor Coney.
Sorry, just clarify, further discussion on the white paper?
Yes.
Yeah, I have some comments and questions.
Go right ahead.
Thank you. Well, through you, Mr. Mayor. First, I think we all agree to thank Executive Director Skinner and Director Culver for this paper. It's thorough and it's not an easy undertaking, and I'd like to note that I think it was done very well in a short period of time. So thank you for that. Okay, so I don't think it's any secret that I have some background in telecommunications. So I want to clarify something that might not jump out to the general public. So on page 13 of the white paper, there's 6 service providers, telecommunication towers and equipment. And we say that the revenue of 2018 was $37,042, which was applied against maintenance and hydro costs. So first I want to clarify, that revenue generated was applied against our own maintenance and hydro costs, certainly not that of the tenants.
Executive Director.
Through you, yes, it was applied to the town's operating and maintenance costs, our own.
Okay, thank you. And then when we talk about our own operating and maintenance costs, we say in the white paper, it said that it's estimated that $47,000 in maintenance and utility costs are spent, but that is further estimated it might be up to $100,000 a year. Can you talk a little bit about that, break that down for us a bit?
Executive Director.
Surely, through you, Chair. What we put in the report was that it would be on top of the funding that we were paying for operations and maintenance and utilities, which was at 47 or so. We wanted to add in a recognition that we spend a considerable amount of staff time. So the other, $54,000 or $53,000, or approaching that, because we said approaching $100,000, represents approximately a half of a technician. Now that's not all from one department, though it's largely from the facilities department. We do get some help from parks and also from public works for the various things that happen, the alarm calls, the work we need to arrange, etc. So we haven't hired anyone specifically for that work, but as we are starting to look at needing more people, it certainly is a factor to have that person or portions of people dedicating their time to making sure the terminals are reasonably well operated and maintained.
Hello, Councillor Coney.
Yes, thank you. Does the technician does the town technician maintenance person spend any of their time dedicated to assisting or escorting the technicians from the wireless telecommunication companies and their access to the roof?
Executive Director.
Yes, some time is in fact spent arranging that access and escorting them up and down, or their equipment's up and down providing a safe access, maintaining the elevator, those types of activities.
Thank you, and a follow-up to that, I don't know if you can disclose it or not, Executive Director, but do we charge the tenants any sort of compensation or fee for the use of the town's technician time or the maintenance of the elevator for them to access the rooftop?
Currently, that is not an explicit part of the agreement. It is considered included in the current agreements under the lease rates.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can I continue with my questions?
So we're getting into some nuts and bolts here. I think on the staff stuff, we could probably do offline. If you have larger issues, go ahead.
I would like to spend more time talking about the wireless tenants on top, and just as a placeholder, I'll say I have some further broad concerns or questions with regard to the wear and tear they might be posing on the rooftop and their role to play in the maintenance of the facility, as well as the current rate that we are receiving. But a general further question would be, we reference the survey we conducted on the asset sale proceeds in the white paper, and we say we haven't released them because we're still analyzing them, which surprised me because I thought it was a type of survey that sort of self-answered, that just sort of that data just became immediately available. Is there a timeline on when we might release to the public the feedback received from how best to use the $18 million?
I think that will be done when the process is completed, and it has not been completed, but I'll look to the Executive Director for additional input.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, we don't have a timeline, although I understand that the analysis is proceeding well, and there was a need to look through. There was the written comments. There was a number of comments that included things like personal identifiable information and that type of thing. But I understand that it is proceeding, but I don't have a date.
And who could provide that date?
I think staff will get back and provide that date.
Yeah, I think it's important, given the number of people we've gathered here today and the amount of
It's
interest.
an important issue for our entire community of 24,000 people, how we're going to invest $18 million. And when the process is done, those numbers will be very much in the public.
Fantastic. Okay, and I think that concludes my questions. Thank you. Thanks again, Executive Director.
Councillor Hammond.
I'll just echo, because I know everyone feels the same, Councillor Comey's thanks to our staff who pulled this great white paper together. My question is about the ongoing maintenance of the structure. We've heard some comments this morning about that. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wondering if anyone from our staff can comment on whether there will be any particular recommendations coming forward in our 2020 budget for maintenance of these structures while we're deliberating what's going to happen next and making decisions different from what we've done in the past.
I'll look to the CAO for that.
Through your worship to Councillor. Yes, we will include a maintenance cost between now and when we present the budget to the council. If we have more accurate information, that maintenance cost might go up or might go down, but there will be a maintenance cost in there. We will ensure that nothing that we do preempts council's ability to make an informed choice in the future of the terminal.
Thank you.
Councillor, any comments, questions? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Executive Director, we are talking about a public consultation at this point, correct? We're not talking nuts and bolts and figures. We are about policy at this table. Even if we were to double the rent of the yacht club unilaterally and arbitrarily, that would still only be $30,000. And even if we were to double the rents unilaterally and arbitrarily of our telecommunications people, that would still only be about $80,000. So those are not the numbers that we're dealing with right today. What we're dealing with is whether we're going to continue with the consultation. Can you perhaps explain to me how many dollars we're going to be spending on this consultation if we were to decide today to go ahead with it?
Executive Director.
Through you, Chair. So we put in the cover report that a figure of up to $20,000 on the consultation itself. That would really be to make sure that we had the appropriate advice on how to do an interactive consultation with the community. So for the consultation itself, that would be the limit. And we'd be looking at deciding on the process to make a decision. What are the steps that we would go through to figure out how to find partners, etc.
Thank you.
Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much. Saunderson, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor McLeod. Yeah, I agree with Councillor McLeod. I think the numbers that we're talking about today are quite small, considering it's an $8 million to $10 million build out. But I would ask, within the $20,000, if we can also add maybe the up to $10,000 to get proper photos and maybe a skilled diver or drone to go down and make sure that the foundation is good. At the end of the day, they said the structure was good and not sinking, but when we have 4,000 timbers underneath, 90-year-old timbers, I would just like the public and myself to know absolutely everything when we're doing this consultation. So we're not assuming, we actually have photographic proof or video or whatever. And I noticed on page 13 that it says up to 10. So I think anything with these numbers, with the amount that it could cost us is absolutely minimal and needed to be done. That would be my only ask, if we could add that in as maybe a friendly, I don't know. Anyways, Mayor Saunderson, I'll let you deal with it. That is my comment, that I think the numbers are quite high and that's minimal cost. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I guess the question through to the Executive Director is the cost of the underwater assessment, the timber assessment, is that included in the 20,000 or would that be in addition to?
The what's in the report that I believe Councillor Madigan was referring to is that one of the unknowns we talked about whether there was actual clear access to the timber piles. So for example, if underwater, one could, either a properly skilled diver or some type of underwater drone, be able to go in and take pictures of the piles, maybe samples. So that indicates that work, not necessarily the amount to have an engineering firm then analyze the samples and provide an assessment of the foundation itself. So the 20,000 is for consulting support, potentially with Mr. Madigan. Councillor Madigan's proposal was accepted, it would be an additional 10 to make sure that we had pictures and samples of and knowledge of the access to the underside of the terminals.
So then that would be an amendment to the recommendation. If you can put that on the floor, in a second, Councillor Madigan will deal with that.
Thank you again, Councillor McLeod. Yes, sir, please.
It's not like attorney say, you have to say.
Yeah, okay, buddy. Thank you.
Okay. So I've got a mover and Councillor Madigan. I'll look for a seconder for that, Councillor McLeod. So we'll deal first then with the amendment. Are there any questions or comments around the table on the amendment? Councillor Hanley.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, I was just wondering if I could have staff input on whether this stage of what we're embarking on is an appropriate time to do this work.
Executive Director.
I think that, through you, Chair, before we know what the future of the terminals will be, we want to be cognizant of how much we invest. However, given the importance of the foundation and the smallness of this number, I would not be against doing a minor study to confirm access and provide samples. It could be delayed or it could go forward now.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. More of a comment. I do have several questions which I'll follow up directly with staff as they relate to more long-term issues that need to be dealt with. But my comment relates more to the process and speaking to the community as a whole. And Mayor Saunderson, if you give me a bit of latitude, I served, as many know, on the last council between 2010 and 2014 that went down the path of looking at best and highest uses for the terminal lands, etc. And although I believe that my colleagues at the time had their heart and intent in the right place, the process was fundamentally flawed. And as a result, opportunities that were presented were squandered, and here we are, 6-7 years later with no further movement ahead. And one of the things that I'm quite pleased at, really excited about in terms of this opportunity, and I believe that when I say this, and I shouldn't speak for others around the table, but I believe that we have a like-minded approach in the sense that this is process-driven, that we want to ensure that we take the time, and I know members of the community are frustrated that they want to see some action take place. But we need to follow a process that ensures that we have all of the information is fact-based, and that we have gone down every opportunity or avenue possible to ensure that we are exploring the best and highest uses. So that the last bullet point that was on one of the pages that talked about the community access, that whatever the desired outcome is at the end, that the lands that are at the base of the terminal and the land behind continue to be for community access. That should be point number one moving forward. One of the things that was a failure, if I may, as a result of the council that when we looked at this, is that we had a philosophy or mindset at that point that we did not want to spend monies on consultants. We did not want to go outside for expertise. And I think that decision ultimately cost us, and unfortunately it cost us years. And I raise that point only in the sense that I think as we move forward, we as a council need to be committed to spending, 10, 15, 20, several hundreds, thousands of dollars to really ensure that we do go down every avenue and explore every option possible. And one very small example would be that for those that don't know, the council of the day, we actually did put the terminals up for sale. They were actually publicly available, and we used local real estate services. And I mean, no disrespect to the individuals that were involved. We hired them, we gave them a specific mandate. But at the end of the day, when we look back, I mean, that was a fundamental error in the sense that we should have been hiring and using expertise on a global level, because really, the monies that are going to be required, when people talk about visions of a hotel or condominiums or a restaurant on top, and I draw a parallel, many people are aware of the development at the foot of Heritage, Perfect World. And I'm not privy to anything there other than the fact that what's public, and that is that it potentially would be a 6-story building, it would be condominiums, it would be a hotel, restaurant, very much the similar things that people would envision for potentially a terminal use. And yet, I think if people were to talk to that developer would tell you that that is going to be, from a financial standpoint, a very, very costly but potentially risky endeavor. And I use it just as a macro example of to shed some caution that I know that people are passionate about this. I know that people want to be able to preserve and see a legacy and have some type of higher and better use moving forward. But at the end of the day, some of these passions and desires are going to be determined by market forces that, quite frankly, are not within necessarily our control. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I've got 2 boys whose great-grandfather, and people can figure this out on their own because I'm not from the community, but their great-grandfather was part of the team that built the terminals. And I appreciate the history and the legacy of the building. And I, from a personal standpoint, am very fortunate. I've had 2 opportunities to go to the top of the building. One was with the second Vision 2020 committee back in the early 2000s, and the second was a private tour that I'll never forget with the late Jim Kilgore. And when you're top of the building and you have that 360-degree view of the harbor and out to the bay and of course across to Christian Island and to the east and the west, without exception, it is the best view in the community, with the exception of maybe some of the views from the top of the escarpment. And I think we all get that and we appreciate that. And we appreciate the passion that's been exhibited this morning, the passion that's come through with the signatures as it relates to wanting to retain our cultural heritage, etc. But I just want to caution people in the sense that we really need to be prepared to look at all options that are available to ensure that we are making a fiscal decision that is best and highest use for all members of our community. And that I ask not only my colleagues around the table, but I ask members of the community that you give us the latitude to follow a proper process. And if that process takes us a year or two, that we are given that opportunity, because in conclusion, Mayor Saunderson, when we were running for council, I stood on top of the stage here, and one of the things I said was, we were asked various questions. I said, the questions are irrelevant. The issues are irrelevant. I said, at the end of the day, we are running because we're being asked to make decisions. And quite frankly, this may be the most difficult decision that this council will have to face this term. Because not only is it a decision of great financial, from a financial standpoint, but we are talking about entrusting 9 people to the legacy of the harbor, to the terminals, and to future uses for generations to come. And so I'm simply stating all of that, and I appreciate giving me the opportunity to make these comments, that as a council, the community give us the opportunity to create a proper process to get this right, whatever that outcome is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. To the amendment, I would comment that I support the amendment because I think it's very important to have as many details as possible before we have that conversation. Once we have the decision on the amendment, I have another comment on the motion as amended, or not.
Okay. Any other comments on the amendment? Councillor McLeod.
Speaking to the amendment as well, thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Your Worship, I will be, obviously I've seconded it, I'll be supporting this amendment as well. I think that we need to make our decisions based on as many facts as we can possibly gather, and so that it is a good decision, and if we can find out what the foundation is like, it will help us in the next steps that we're thinking of taking. And if the foundation is no good, then we have another difficult decision to make. So I will support finding out everything we can.
Thank you. Councillor Doris.
Thank you, Your Worship. So previously, we flagged the issue that the status of the containment facility is also an unknown. I don't want to muddy the waters, no pun intended, but I'm wondering if we are going to be making a prudent investment on research at this point in time, if that should be part of our investigation. And I'm thinking along the lines, at least preliminarily, as soil sampling. Those are my comments.
Thank you. I think we'll leave that for a second amendment if you want to put that on the floor later, but right now we're just dealing with this amendment. So, any other comments on the amendment to add $10,000 to undertake the underwater research on the pilings and the foundation? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Now we'll go back to the original motion, which is the resolution that we received the report and support staff in undertaking the public consultation with a $20,000 budget. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you again, Mayor Saunderson. I guess my question, I just want to have it in my mind, the timing of the consultation in terms of how much information are we going to be seeking. I agree with Councillor McConnell's comments on having as much information as possible so that less of the conversation is anecdotal and more of it is all of us based on the same information. So what is the timing for that in terms of how much time to collect the information and then how much time to get to the public and then how much time to come back again? I know we said it was going to be a long process, but I want to have an understanding in my mind how that's going to roll out.
Thank you, Executive Director.
Through you, Chair, the report currently says that we would be intending to report back to the committee in the first quarter of 2020. And pending the availability of the engineering consultant resources, which I believe to be readily available, I think we can still make that timeline while providing a robust ability for the community to provide input at the white paper stage. And then, pending the process that we use, there would be additional time after that for bidding or expressions of interest, but that would be after committee's decision.
So just to clarify that, we're hoping in the first quarter of 2020 we'll be at the position where we'll have enough input to make our decision on the various options that you set out in the white paper.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, could I please request that I think it was slide 8 that had that laid out what the public consultation would look like, just so council can see that. Or maybe it wasn't number 8. It's the, yes, no, that's it. No, I apologize. It is number 8. Thank you. And could I trouble the executive director just to walk us through that one more time, please?
Executive Director.
By you, Chair. So this is what we would see at first blush to be the minimum of what we would want to do as part of the consultation. So a news release on the decision of the committee, and that news release would include consultation opportunities. We would also further promote the opportunity in community and commercial forums quite broadly. We're looking for partners within and also beyond Collingwood, so the P3 type of partners. We want our social enterprise folks and our nonprofits to be aware of this ability to comment. We would post the draft white paper on our own Engage Collingwood website. We would have interactive public town hall engagement sessions, hopefully professionally facilitated so that we can really get some of the issues on the table and well and robustly discussed. So we're looking at least an afternoon and an evening workshop option so that we could get a broad swath of folks to come out. We would meet with interested commercial and community parties upon request, so people who had more comprehensive things to say that wanted to talk with us, we would certainly want to hear from them directly. And then we talked about the timing of returning to this committee within the first 3 months of 2020. Thank you.
There's another hand up. Councillor Doherty, did you have a comment? Are there any other comments before we call the vote? I would just like to make one comment, and I think this has been an important first step in an important discussion about a very critical asset in Collingwood. And as I said before, I think this is a collaborative process. It should be a community building process. And as we move forward, we are all trying to work together to come to an outcome that is in the best interest of our community. So I look forward to going down this road. And thank everyone for attending on this issue today. So with that said, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. And I think what I'll do at this point is call a morning recess, bio break. So we will resume in 10 minutes. So 2 minutes after 11 by my watch. Thank you. So we're dealing with item 6.2, C 2019-06, governance structure and procedural bylaw review. And I will look to Clerk Dahl to take us through the presentation.
Your Worship, just before the acting clerk speak, I just want to say that the acting clerk and her staff did a tremendous amount of work on the items that you're about to discuss. But before I ask Ms. Dahl to go through the presentation, I want to acknowledge the contribution of Clerk Almas on these initiatives. She's not here with us today, but she did a tremendous amount of work with her own staff and with staff from other departments to bring us to where we are today. So I just wanted to say thanks to her and acknowledge her in her absence, and I'll hand you over now to the acting clerk.
Through your worship, thank you for saying that. I was going to also acknowledge Sarah and all her hard work that she put into these reports that are before us today. So the first one we're going to be discussing is the review of the procedural bylaw and governance structure. The objectives that we looked at when we did this review is one, maintaining good governance to the stakeholders in an accountable and transparent manner. The second was increasing efficiencies while managing our corporate priorities. The third being providing council and the public with more time to review the agenda material and be more informed prior to the meetings. And the fourth one, ensuring ability for public participation is enhanced wherever possible. So the first thing that we looked at was the governance structure. In reviewing the governance structure, it was implemented in 2014. We reviewed the pros and cons of the current system, and committee of the whole were explored with opportunity for public consultation and engagement and open governance in mind. The current system provides additional opportunities for public engagement and opportunity for members of council to be able to specialize in an area of interest and gain experience in chairing meetings, and this is with the 3 standing committees that we have. Staff also explored governance structures utilized at the county level with respect to its governance committee, where the mayor, deputy mayor, chairs, and vice chairs of each of their standing committees form its membership. As we only have a council of 9 members, it is felt that it's important to have all members of council engaged in the significant strategic initiatives and budget deliberations with regard to the strategic initiative standing committee. Staff believe that changes being proposed to the procedural bylaw will assist in enhancing openness and transparency and provide additional opportunities to the public and stakeholders in this regard, and that the current standing committee structure remain in place with these enhancements that we're going to be going through. So the first thing that we looked at was membership rotation. The membership rotations on our current standing committees was reviewed, ensuring the members are given opportunity within these committees to have more streamlined appointment process. Staff are recommending the election of chair and vice chair to the standing committees, with the exception of the standing strategic initiatives committee, occur every 2 years as opposed to every year. The vice chair would automatically be appointed as the chair to that specific standing committee, and the chair would remain on the standing committee as a past chair to provide any expertise or knowledge to the new chair and vice chair. An election would be held for a new vice chair, and the remaining member would be appointed to the other standing committee to provide some variety. The second recommendation that we're looking at was the appointments to our other committees and local boards. In reviewing the membership, staff also looked at the appointments to the local boards and advisory committees. Currently, council is appointed at the beginning of the term and appointed for 4 years. Members do have the opportunity to bring forward recommendations should they choose to have their appointments reviewed. We are recommending that this go in line with our membership rotation to our standing committees and reviewing these every 2 years, and we'd also keep in that opportunity to have it reviewed at any time should a member want to bring it forward. The third recommendation we're looking at is standing committee mandates and reporting structure. So this is basically come out of the recent organizational changes that took place, and most notably the implementation of the role of the Executive Director of Corporate and Community Services, and how those roles have kind of been integrated into that position. So for the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee, staff are recommending that municipal elections
procurement, and emergency management be added to the standing committee, as these are large-scale items that affect the whole corporation in terms of corporate strategy and budget management. We're also recommending that emergency services also fall under this committee because it follows along the same initiatives. For the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee, the following are being added to the mandate of the Corporate and Community Services Standing Committee as they align with the responsibilities of the new formed Customer and Corporate Services Division. They would be customer service, healthy community initiatives, green and environmental initiatives, and fleet facility. What would be removed from this committee would be bylaw and marketing business development, as they now fall under the portfolio of planning and building services. For the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee, as mentioned, bylaw development, enforcement, and marketing and business development are being added to the mandate of this committee as they align with the responsibilities of planning and building services portfolio, with a suggested name change from market and business development to be economic development, business retention, and attraction. Removal of these are obviously the rail and airport as we sold those assets, and the Jordan Trail Board of Management as it was dissolved a couple years ago. So one of the major changes that Sarah and I took a look at when we were reviewing the procedural bylaw was when we meet, how we meet. So this is a draft schedule that we put together on the meeting calendars. So one of the major changes is the meeting frequency. So staff are recommending that the standing committee continue to meet once a month, but report into one council meeting to be held at the end of the month as opposed to two separate council meetings. We've scheduled in a tentative SIC meeting for the first Wednesday of each month to help staff better plan for these meetings and reduce the amount of extra meetings that are being called that aren't on our annual calendar, which will hopefully help you guys out as well with your personal schedules. To follow suit with the county and many of our other surrounding municipalities, we're recommending a recess in the month of August instead of reducing the amount of meetings we have and splitting them up over the summertime. The proposed schedule provides additional time for public comment in between the standing committee meetings and the council meeting, and to resolve any outstanding issues prior to these items coming forward to council by having that break. If you can go back to the calendar, yeah. So you'll see the break in the third week of each month, which will allow for additional public consultation and time for any changes to be made for things that are presented to council. Agendas will be issued on the Wednesday prior to the Monday meetings. We're trying to do this right now, although we're not mandated to do it. So this would require us to issue the agendas 96 hours in advance of the meeting time to provide council with additional time to review the materials and ask questions of staff prior to the meetings. To assist with providing enhancing public input, should correspondence be received on an agenda item after the agenda has been issued, we'll be able to circulate, if approved, this correspondence to council ahead of the meeting, just so it's also incorporated into the decision making on whatever item it refers to. The lengths of the meetings was discussed, and there's been some concern with the length of meetings and lack of breaks taken during these meetings. To assist with this, staff are proposing that a member be able to request through the chair a recess at any point during the meeting. The chair, however, will determine the length of the break and when it will be taken, as to not interrupt any matter currently being debated or a presentation being given. It should be noted, however, that you are all welcome to take a break if you choose that you need to do so during the meeting, as long as we don't lose quorum. So if you can go to the next slide, members. The standing committee reports. Yeah. To ensure that council's meetings are being run as efficiently as possible, because we'll have the two standing committees that are approved going into the one council meeting. And without compromise and any kind of transparency, staff are proposing that these reports be approved through a consent agenda, similar to what we receive our correspondence through currently. This would be the standing committee consent agenda with the documents and staff reports attached to that in the agenda package, should you want to review them again. And a member would have the ability to pull an item and discuss it and vote on it separately, just as we do with our regular consent items. The next recommendation is providing direction to staff. So to assist staff in managing workload and ensure that items that staff are working on align with the strategic priorities, staff are proposing a request for staff reports be provided to the clerk 24 hours prior to publishing an agenda. The request be submitted on a prescribed form, identifying how the item aligns with the strategic priorities set by council or items identified in the budget. If it doesn't meet these, then why is it important to move forward outside of those standards? And the request is then vetted through the CAO and applicable department prior to the agenda being published, and is then included in the next agenda in the form of a motion provided to council and the public, providing them notice of it coming forward before the meeting, as opposed to right on the table and voted at, with no public ability to review the matter before it's determined. The next one is the general consent items. With the configuration of the meeting schedule, it might be difficult for us to bring forward a piece of correspondence on a particular standing committee prior to council if it's felt. So an example, if we had something that was specific to development but had a deadline, this would provide us with the opportunity to put that on the council agenda and have it expedited kind of through the system and not restrict us from having those items strictly on the consent or the standing committee agendas. I'm almost done. Presentations from council. So this has come to light with this new council, which is a good thing. Throughout this term, there's been requests made by members of council to provide presentations on conferences and seminars that they've attended that will bring value to the municipality. This recommendation is just to provide some framework to those types of requests. So the recommendation is that such requests would be provided to the clerk 48 hours prior to the agenda being published. The council member would be given 5 minutes to present their materials, and the council member making the presentation would be fully responsible for creating their own presentation materials and providing them to the clerk the Thursday before the meeting, so we can circulate them with all the other presentation materials that council would be considering for that meeting. The next one is about electronic meeting participation. So we've had some issues in our advisory committees with getting quorum. So this would assist in that by providing them to be able to be counted towards quorum and actually vote using electronic participation. Some of our committees that we've had issues with is our museum and our heritage committee. The last one is remuneration and compensation. So to allow some flexibility on how remuneration is provided to council members who sit on the various committees and the local boards, staff are proposing the CIO be provided the ability to authorize such compensation in an individual basis, and then to ensure that transparency is still maintained, an annual report would be brought forward with any of these instances where compensation has been allowed.
Great, thank you, Acting Clerk Dahl. And I will look to the audience if there's any comments or questions about the presentation we just heard on the governance review item. Seeing none, then I will turn to council, and I'm going to ask the acting clerk. I think what I'm going to do is deal with each recommendation separately. So because there's a lot in there, and there may be discussion on some as opposed to others, I'm wondering how best to get that recommendation, that on the floor and structured so we can deal with each one separately. So we'll just go through and we'll get a mover and a seconder for each separate recommendation. Is that the best way? Okay. So the first recommendation, I think, is that the current standing committee structure remained in place, and well, I'll leave it at that then because we'll deal with the subsequent recommendations separately. So I need a mover and a seconder for the first recommendation, which is that the current standing committee structure remain in place. I get a mover, Councillor Jeffrey, and seconder, Councillor Doherty. Council, any comments or questions before I call the vote on this recommendation? Seeing none, I will call the vote on the first recommendation. All in favor? I think I've got unanimously. We'll move to the second recommendation.
Mr. Chair, just a point of order. I have to declare a pecuniary interest in one of these items. When should I do that?
You can put it on the record now and we'll deal with it. I'm assuming it's the committee remuneration.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm, I think, the only member of this board that is receiving remuneration for attending an outside agency to which I am appointed. Therefore, I'm going to declare that pecuniary interest when we come to that discussion, and I'll leave the room.
Do it. Thank you. So second recommendation, that the election of chair and vice chair to the standing committees, with the exception of the SIC, occur every 2 years, with the vice chair automatically being appointed as the chair to that specific standing committee. The chair would remain on the standing committee as the past chair, and an election to be held for the vice chair, and the remaining member would be appointed to the other standing committee. After an election, the initial appointments will be recommended by the striking committee. Can I get a mover and seconder for that recommendation, please? Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Doherty. Council, questions or comments before we call vote on that recommendation? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Ms. Saunderson. Just a question. So the remaining member appointed to the other standing committee, does that mean may have the option to go to another standing committee as opposed to will go to another one? Or I just was confused by the word, that's all.
So the intent would be may, but we can only have 5 people sitting on each committee, so the extra people would have to agree that they would want to stay on the standing committee that they're currently sitting on.
Councillor Berman.
In general, I'm not in favor of these changes. I think had they been done at the start of the term, rather than sort of changing the rules after a year, then there may have been a difference in who ran for chair and vice chair. I think that this isn't necessarily in the best interest of who we serve. So, in other words, we all have skill sets, some that are better served for the committees that we're already on, and the possibility of forcing members to change doesn't necessarily serve the best interests of the community. I'm not going to ask to look at this, but I don't even think necessarily changing the chair every 2 years is necessarily in the best interest. I use the library board as an example. We hold an election for chair every year, but it's never changed. The last term was always acclaimed because we deemed that it was in the best interest of the board to keep the best person for the chair. So if we were to look at the current system with Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Madigan, if all 9 members of council deemed that it was in the best interest of the community to keep them as the chair, why would we eliminate that as an option? So I'm not asking to change that, but I'm not in favor of a mandatory change halfway through a term.
Duly noted, Councillor Berman, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Mohab.
I'd like to move an amendment that we sever this particular recommendation as well to accommodate Councillor Berman's concerns as expressed just a moment ago. So, where was that? So the recommendation is that the election happen every 2 years, and I think the concern that Councillor Berman has is the second to final point on the screen currently, which is the remaining member appointed to the other standing committee. Am I correct in that, Councillor Berman, if I were to move that this particular part be severed, would you be willing to? Is that something that the committee would? I'll just make that motion and see if I get a seconder. I would move that we sever this recommendation so that the remaining member appointed to the other standing committee is dealt with separately.
I'm just going to get clarification. Councillor McLeod, Erwin, are you severing it to simply remove that one item, the remaining member appointed to the other standing committee, or are you breaking it into its components so it would be that the elections happen every 2 years? Is that the one you're dealing with first?
I would like to deal with all of them, with the exception of the remaining member appointed to the other standing committee would be dealt with separately. So 2 motions is what I'm looking at here. The amendment would be that the second one would be dealt with separately. Second to last point be dealt with separately.
Okay. What I might recommend then is just actually we sever all of them.
Okay.
Deal with them separately because I think there's going to be more discussion about other items. So we're just going to deal with each individual component separately.
So moved.
So can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Berman. So then breaking this into its constituent components, then we're going to start first with the 2-year term. So the recommendation is that the election of chair and vice chair to the standing committees, with the exception of the SIC, occur every 2 years. So we're voting just on this discrete item now. Deputy Mayor.
Mayor Saunderson, may I suggest that we, given that now we've broken this out, we speak to each one?
Yes.
Only in the context that, you know, we may have a discussion of point 1 that may have an impact on a further point. Was it your intent to have a discussion about each one prior to voting, or voting on each one?
I was going to suggest we vote on each one.
So may I recommend that we have a discussion on each point first and
Before you call the vote?
Yes, simply because a comment on one may have an impact on a comment further down.
Yes. All right, well then let's have the discussion then, and I won't call the vote on the first item, which is the 2-year term. So discussion on the 2-year term. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I have no concern with this recommendation. I like the notion that it is structured, that is predictable, and it provides multiple opportunities for members of the standing committee to chair the meeting.
Okay. Other comments? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. I conversely, Mr. Mayor, like the system we have now in terms of a chair would not serve more than 2 consecutive years. The elephant in the room is that the last year of that committee, you have a lot of public exposure and appearance going into an election, and it's not equal opportunity for everyone on the committee in terms of who they want to lead, and it's basically dictated by a premature election. I just, in my head, I think restricting it to a 2-year maximum works the best way in terms of making that equal opportunity for everyone in year 4.
That's Matt.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. I absolutely agree with Councillor Jeffrey. Last term, in the middle, we actually, I switched committees. We put it to a vote, and it was going to be between Councillor Lloyd and I, and Kevin really wanted to stay where he was, and I was pretty sure that if it went to a vote, I would have won. And so I let him stay, and I went over to a different committee. And with Councillor Jeffrey's help, I became the vice chair right away, and then Kathy helped me through being the chair in the last year. I believe with 5 people on a committee, with the mayor can never be chair. I believe it gives all 4 other people the opportunity to chair that committee. I will tell you this personally, I would not have accepted the chair in the first year of it. I was the only, other than Mayor Saunderson, the only returning council member, and I did not want to chair it in the first year. I want to give other people an opportunity, and having it once a year, so everybody has the chance. So it's really unfair for the other 2 that remain on that don't get a chance to chair the meeting. So in our committee, we have Councillor Berman and Councillor Comey that under this won't have a chance. So we're all learning the structure and all trying to get better, and we all have to be given opportunity. So I don't mind that you can't do it over 4 years for more than 2 years, but that could be year 1 and year 3 or year 2 and year 4, whatever have you. But I would move that we do it every year. And it gives everybody an opportunity. We're all elected for the right reasons and for the same reasons. So to make it a popularity contest in the first year or a fear factor because we don't have any knowledge of how to chair a meeting is highly unfair for the people that put their nose to the grindstone and learn about it very quickly. So that being said, I would like it to go to a year where the vice chair becomes automatically the chair and the chair just steps back.
Any other comments on this particular item? Councilor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through you to the deputy clerk. The boards and advisory committees are still once a year. Are they? Or?
Through the chair, Councillor Berman, no. The boards and advisory committees, the way the bylaw is currently written, is for the term of council, unless a member brings forward that they would like to be removed from that board or committee.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on this? Councilor Berman, go ahead.
I'll second Councilor Madigan's motion.
Okay, I'm lost, because I think we're dealing with each of these separately, and then we're following this motion.
Okay.
So we'll hold that.
So maybe if I could clarify, so if the first broken out recommendation is defeated, then council would remain as they currently are, with being appointed every year with the ability to extend their term as chair for 2 years.
And then is that, how does that, because right now we don't have a past chair staying on the committee, and we would, so let's just go through the discussion. So from my personal perspective, the county, we sit for 2 years, and I don't have a problem with that, because I think 1 year is a short-term timeline. I guess where I do have more issues is with the idea of the vice chair automatically stepping up, or the past chair staying on, because I like the idea of cross-pollination. So while I'm not opposed to a 2-year term, I think it works very well with the county. I think that the natural flow of the individual elections is, I prefer that. So dealing then with the second item, the vice chair automatically being appointed as the chair to that specific standing committee. Let's get comments on that as we work our way down on this item. Councillor Doran.
I would also support that recommendation. The vice chair over the previous period has, I believe, a responsibility to begin to specialize in the matters that will come forward to that standing committee. So they should be prepared to take over the chair. In this case, they would also anticipate taking over the chair. And if they are uncomfortable with the notion of moving from vice chair to chair, then my suggestion would be to decline the nomination at the outset.
Thank you. Any other comments? Council? All right, we'll move on to item 3. The chair remain on the standing committee as past chair. Comments or questions? Councillor Doherty?
I think that that is a great way to retain some, as you mentioned earlier, expertise.
All right, moving on to item. So the election to be held for vice chair, that would flow from the previous 3. The remaining member appointed to the other standing committee. I think Deputy Clerk had said that that would be permissive. I guess what that does do though is limit the cross-pollination between the 2 committees to potentially 1 person only. Questions or comments on that? All right, and then after the election, the initial appointments will be recommended by the striking committee. I guess that's what we're performing this process. All right, so, Councilor McLeod.
I'd like to comment on the final point that is on our list here. So the current way that we do it, as I understood it, is that we were polled through an email and sent in our requests to the mayor, and then the appointments were made at a strategic initiatives committee. Am I correct on that, Deputy Clerk Tom?
Through the chair, yes, you are correct. So our strategic initiatives standing committee also stands as our striking committee. So it is still done through a striking committee through that standing committee.
Thank you. And my comment is that I don't recall a whole lot of deliberation that took place. It just was, oh, this one wants this and this one wants that, and that's how it took place. So I'm not entirely sure. I would like to find some way to codify what it is that we do when it comes, what this council does when it comes to appointing people to their preferred choice. And I believe that there's some discussion about when we did this about the number of votes each person got, and that is included in our procedural bylaw as well, is it not, Deputy Clerk Dahl?
Yeah, you're correct. If there was a larger number that were more interested in one committee than the other, then we'd have to have an election to see who would be sitting on that standing committee.
And so what it happened in this case is that there was no clamoring for one particular spot. Do we think that it is required that we codify that sort of stuff, or do we think that we're happy starting with the mishmash that we've got going?
It's been practiced on since I have been in the clerk's department. I think just because you never know when you're going to come up with a conflict or more interest in the other, I think it's good to just have the procedure there if we need to use it.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right then, so moving through the process then, we'll go back up and we'll vote on these individually. So starting with the first one, that the election of chair and vice chair to the standing committees, with the exception of the SSE, occur every 2 years. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
May I ask a quick question of clarification?
Yes, specific.
If that is adopted, is it safe to assume that we've completed year one? Okay.
So mover and seconder. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All in favor of the 2-year term? Sorry, keep your hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is defeated. On the second one, the vice chair automatically being appointed as the chair to the specific standing committee. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Doherty. I will call the vote. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is defeated as well. The chair remaining on the standing committee. I need a clarification. I should probably be calling opposed as well, isn't it? Just for good practice. So then I will call opposed rather than just assuming. So on the second one then, we had 4, and I will call opposed. 4 opposed. Somebody dropped off from that. Oh, are you there? Opposed I am, yes. So opposed to the second one, vice chair automatically being appointed as chair. So we've got 5 opposed then. Moving to the chair remaining on the standing committee's past chair, all in favor? Did I get a mover? No, I didn't. Okay, so I need to get a mover and second. My apologies. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All in favor? 2 opposed. So that is defeated. An election be held for the vice chair, but that follows. I don't know. No, that's going to happen every year, just as it is now, I think. But so that's not a change. But I'll call the vote. All in favor? We're voting on. My apologies. An election to be held for the vice chair. I need a mover and seconder to get that too. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Doherty. And this is really going to stay status quo. Yes, so we have to do that anyway. So I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor? We got that one down. That, was your hand up, Councillor Berman? Okay, so that was unanimous. We're getting this. The remaining member appointed to the other standing committee. So I need a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor. Councillor, or Deputy Mayor and Councillor Doherty, all in favor?
Amendment? I just understood that little billy one. The remaining member may be appointed to the other standing committee. I don't want it to be an automatic change. Is that what's intended by that?
I think the Deputy Clerk said it was permissive. However, there is no remaining member now because we've defeated all the other things. So I think just to be consistent, we probably should defeat this, but because the status quo is going to remain, but I'll leave that up to the voting. So, did I get a voter? I got a mover in a second. So I'm going to call them all in favor of this permissive. All opposed. official appointments will be recommended by the striking committee. That is currently the status quo. So that's reinforced. So I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Doherty, all in favor? And that is passed unanimously. So that is dealt down with recommendation 2. So the next recommendation, yes. The recommendation is the council appointments be reviewed every 2 years, however, can be reviewed annually if requested by a member of council, and such requests not require the formal rules of consideration. And that's appointments to other committees and boards. And I think, just for clarification, Deputy Clerk, you told us that that's a 4-year appointment right now?
Through the chair, that's correct, and these would be for the appointments to the BIA, the NBCA, the library board. I'm sure I'm missing a couple more.
So the upshot is we're now doing it every 2 years, and there's a possibility to move after 1 year at request. Can I get a mover and seconder for that, please? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Doherty, you guys are a tag team. All right, questions or comments on that recommendation? Deputy Mayor.
Question of clarification to the Deputy Clerk. Of the boards and committees, which ones are legislative and which ones have just become historical?
I believe the only one that is not legislative at this point is the BIA. And possibly the library board.
Councillor McLeod.
Is the Deputy Mayor questions complete? Could I ask a question of clarification as well? What do we mean by review? Does that mean that we go to a strategic initiatives committee meeting and discuss whether this person is still suitable for this job, or is it an automatic change? Is it by request? I'm not quite sure what we mean by review.
Through the chair to Councillor McLeod, it's not made for like a formal review like that. It's just to give an opportunity should people want to move around, that if there is that request, then we can look at that point and evaluate. So if you were not satisfied on the NBCA and you'd like to give someone else the opportunity, then that's an opportunity where we can talk about it.
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Your Worship. Just to add to the acting clerk, there are occasions as well when members' appointments, people's status change. And although we have a provision right now where we could replace, if someone were to voluntarily vacate that appointment, there might be instances where actually the committee may want to ask that person to consider vacating if their circumstances change and they may potentially be in a conflict.
Thank you.
Any other comments around the table before I call the vote? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor of this recommendation? And that is carried unanimously. The updated mandates and reporting to council. There's 2 recommendations in this section. So the recommendations are standing committees meet once a month, reporting into 1 council meeting to be held in the month, and that council, standing committee, and its local boards and advisory committees recess for the month of August. Can I get a mover and a seconder for those recommendations, please? Are we?
So through the chair to the committee, I didn't have, oh, there it is on page 7, halfway through the page.
That's right.
Well, that's meeting frequency, sorry. I don't have a recommendation spelled out in the agenda, but for the realignment. So that was just the discussion that took place about with the new rules that were introduced through the organizational review, moving some of the mandates through the different standing committees. So I can repeat those if you guys are unclear, and we can vote on each So the first one for the Strategic Initiatives Committee, staff are recommending that the following be added to the mandate for municipal elections, procurement, and emergency management.
Councillor, or Deputy Mayor? You moving? Oh, perfect. And I need a seconder. Councillor Dord. Any comments or questions on expanding the role of strategic initiatives? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Dealing with the next committee, Corporate Community Services.
So for the Corporate and Community Services recommendation, staff are recommending that customer service initiatives, healthy community initiatives, green environmental initiatives, and fleet and facilities be added to this committee, with the removal of emergency management, which would be added to SIC, and marketing development and bylaw being moved to development and operations.
I need a mover and seconder for this. Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Jeffrey. Any comments or questions before I call the vote on this item? Councillor McLeod.
Can I ask a little bit about the rationale? I'm not sure to whom this question belongs, but the rationale for having moved some of these things. I'm seeing bylaw is no longer, and communications is no longer going to this particular committee, and fleet and facilities has been moved into it from development and operations services. Can I ask about the rationale behind this and how it is thought that this will improve service for our constituents?
I saw that the CAO answered. I think Stu did a realignment.
Yeah, through your worship. Yes, this has to do with the realignment of the organization, and to some extent, as best as we can, although it's not a perfect match, to ensure that directors don't necessarily have to report into different committee of council. So as far as we can, we're trying to align directors to committees, and also looking at bundling services. So for example, moving bylaw development and enforcement to DNO makes sense because all the planning related functions are there as well. So that, from a thematic perspective, it makes sense to put all the property related services together in one standing committee. So a combination of two things, trying to bundle services that make sense, that should travel together, and secondly, from an HR perspective, trying to minimize a director reporting into different committees.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, council? I'll call a vote. All in favor? And that. Any opposed? You in favor? Okay, that was carried unanimously. So development and operations services.
Yep, so the third one would be with the development and operations services, and as discussed earlier, this would be moving bylaw and market developing into this standing committee, with the possible renaming of market and development to be economic development, business retention and attraction. And again, this is based on the CEO's comments of the realignment.
Thank you. Can I get a mover here in a second? Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Hamlin. Questions or comments before I call the vote? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Meeting frequency. This takes us to page 7 of the report. So there's 2 recommendations. And they are that the standing committee meet once a month, or standing committees meet once a month, reporting into one council meeting to be held at the end of the month, and that council, standing committee, and its local boards and advisory committees recess for the month of August. Can I get a mover and a seconder for those? Councillor Hamlin, the Deputy Mayor. Questions or comments, council? Councillor McLeod.
I would move that we separate these as well for discussion and voting.
Good, done. So dealing with the first one, the standing committees meet once a month, reporting into one council meeting to be held at the end of the month. On that particular recommendation, questions or comments, council? Councillor Comey.
Sorry, I gotta cue this up before I need it, thank you. Yes, my question is, please, I should have asked this earlier, is that standing committee meeting going to be during the day?
Acting Mayor, Becky, you next to me.
Through the chair, our intent is to have these meetings mostly in the evening to help promote public engagement as best as we can.
questions or comments? Sorry, did you have more comments, Councillor? Tony? Sorry, Councillor Jeffrey, and I've got you, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I think most of us can appreciate that this is giving us more time to take in the information before the council meeting. My concern is with the length of one council meeting and our opportunity to have inclusive discussions without going late and beyond our time. And as the saying goes, that the brain can only take in what the bum can endure. So I'm just wondering, I do have some concerns about what the length of those council meetings will become.
Thank you. And maybe kind of just for clarification then, so this recommendation would include the SIC tentative meeting scheduled for the first Wednesday of every month?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor McLeod.
I'd like to echo Councillor Jeffrey's concerns regarding this piece of the recommendation, and I'm going to speak against it. I believe that unless we embark on a pretty serious education campaign for our residents, they are not going to understand or appreciate or like that we are having one fewer council meeting per month. I think that it is understood that we as councillors are hired to do a job, and that job is seen as attending council meetings. And so fewer of them, I think, is going to cause some rancor among some people, and I can see why. When I was a private citizen, I wanted, good value for money from my councillors, and if I see them having exactly half as many council meetings as was agreed to in the election, I don't know that I could get behind that. So those are my comments.
Councillor Jeffrey, I'll get back to you. I'm going to go around the table. If I don't have anyone else, then I'll come back to you. Other comments, Councillor? Councillor Berman?
Thank you, Mayor Sanderson. I'm thinking back to being a spectator during Deputy Mayor Hall's term on council with council meetings once a week, and I thought that was too often as I was learning the process through the 4 years of previous council. I thought I loved the system that way. I would have concerns to going to one meeting a month, and I don't think I can support that either.
Thank you. Councillor Ham?
My question, Mr. Mayor, is for staff and how they think moving to one meeting a month would impact the length of the meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think part of the rationale for consolidating two council meetings into one isn't to reduce the workload of members of council. I think the workload will remain the same, and potentially, as Councillor Jeffrey said, the meeting might be longer. But I think this is part of the best practice. If you look across many municipalities in Ontario, the committee of council meetings come together at one council meeting. More and more policies are interrelated, and it's really difficult to separate these issues and having them be dealt with at separate council meetings. The intention here also is to return to the purpose of the subcommittee, which is where the discussion and dialogue and debate and discussion need to occur. If that model works well, the council meeting in this new proposal would be a little bit longer, but I think from my perspective, the discussion would be richer, both in terms of identifying the connection among the community, social development, economic, customer service policy across the municipality, and secondly, it would give staff and members of council a lot more opportunity to review, and members of the public, frankly, to review document and actually, in my view, come to those meetings better prepared to make informed choices. So it's about best practice, it's about additional time to review documentation, it is about trying to re-embed the discussion that should occur at committee, which is where the real debate should happen, and trying to ensure that the connectivity that happens across the different policies and programs across the municipality is dealt with at one council meeting. So it might be seen as reduced workload, but I think it could potentially result in better decisions.
Thank you. Any follow-up questions, Councillor Hammond? comments or questions? Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the comments by Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor McLeod, because in addition to our councillors, we do have to think about our public, and we talk a lot about engagement, and we talk a lot about our new young families, and thinking about the amount of time we're asking them to come and potentially sit through an issue that's important to them, while a lot of people might feel comfortable leaving their children unattended or with a sibling until 7, 8 o'clock at night. If they could be potentially being accessed at a council meeting until 10 o'clock at night, we're going to put, in my opinion, extra burden on those who may wish to come and sit through an issue. Thank you.
I'll get back to Councillor Hammond. I want to make sure anyone who has not spoken has had an opportunity. That being the case, Councillor Jeffrey, you were first up for a repeat.
Just a clarification, Mayor Saunderson, is SIC, was at the acting clerk's attention that those would be evening as well?
Yeah, through the chair, that's our intent. Our intent through this whole process is to provide more public engagement. So by having it in the evenings, we feel that it would be better suited for the public to be able to attend and participate. There could be occasion where we are intending to have a very large meeting where we may have to start it a little earlier, but we still would anticipate it being through the evening.
Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I feel this discussion almost should be combined with the discussion on how long our meetings go and when we're having meetings. I can see that we will end up with longer council meetings, which in itself isn't a bad thing, and I certainly appreciate Director Amin's comments and agree with them on best practices. And I don't see a problem with having one council meeting a month. But where I see it falling down is that we'd be expected to sit later in the evenings. I know some municipalities have moved to daytime meetings. I know I heard the word public participation mentioned, and I guess this is for another item, but I'll just say briefly that in this day and age, the people I speak to who tell me they're watching council meetings, they're watching them not when we're having the discussions. They're watching them later. It's almost the difference between cable TV and Netflix, where everyone used to have to always just sit there and watch. Now they're watching it and they're streaming in, and the people who come in the evenings, we're not going to get the young families anytime unless there's safety involved, I think, because they just can't accommodate it. Anyway, all to say, I don't really know what to do in terms of I would be agreeable to having one meeting a month, but not if we are going to be there till 10 o'clock every time.
Councillor Gordon.
Thank you. I'm in agreement with most of the comments that have been made thus far, but just speaking now to Councillor Hammond's observation, I believe very strongly that these meetings need to be held in the evening. We provincially and indeed nationally are earnestly trying to encourage more women and younger members of our community to get involved in the process, and it's an expectation for the most part that they will have full-time jobs, and being able to come out to a meeting in the middle of the day may be impossible for those who otherwise might be very interested in participating in the process. So I would strongly endorse keeping the meeting times where they are.
Seeing no other comments, I would say the Deputy Mayor? Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on the access to public. I think that regardless of the outcome in terms of the number of meetings, when the meetings are actually held, the public's never had greater access to us at any time, 24 hours a day, quite frankly. The council structure, the council meeting itself, really doesn't have any public engagement unless somebody formally goes through the process of completing to request a deputation. So really, I think from a strategic standpoint,
we do need to continue the good work that we've done in terms of educating the population that if they want to be engaged, they have an opportunity through the three standing committees, and that they have an opportunity to come publicly speak. But at the same time, whether it be through YouTube, etc., they have access to these meetings at any point in which they can participate in terms of watching at their leisure and have the ability to communicate and comment to us directly at any point. And so I'm respectful of the comments made by others in terms of length of meeting, the time of meeting, but in terms of public access, the public's never had greater access to any politician, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask for clarification through Deputy Clerk. If this, I guess really what I'm looking at, I like the idea of the tentative SIC meeting for first Wednesday of every month. And if we were to not go to the once a month council meeting, would it still be possible to consider that option for the SIC meeting?
Through the chair, if this motion is defeated, I would like to bring forward an alternative option. The issue that we're having today, especially if we move agenda day up to the 96 hours before our meeting, is we have 1 day to turn around items from the standing committee to the council agenda, which makes it extremely difficult for senior management, especially if there's any changes that need to be incorporated or additional information that needs to be included. And then the public isn't given an opportunity to speak on any of that as well. So if this was not to be carried forward today, if I could bring another option forward for consideration, that would be great. And what I would be thinking is to keep corporate community services on the first Monday, development operations on the second Monday, and a council meeting on the third and fourth, with corporate community services items going forward on the third Monday and D&O going forward on the fourth Monday. So then there's a week in between.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, on the clarification then, it would be, although the meetings are back to back, they would, the first meeting on the third Monday would deal with the standing committee meeting of the Monday, the first Monday, and then the second council meeting on the fourth Monday would deal with the standing committee meeting of the second Monday.
Correct.
Okay. So before I call it, I just had some comments, and I'm very appreciative of all the hard work that has gone into this report in terms of trying to find efficiencies and streamline our activities and how we get things from the standing committees, where we've talked about all the heavy lifting being done to getting it to council. Although I too am somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of just one council meeting a month. So I'd like to see us, I understand the timelines and the issues, and based on what you outlined as the alternate recommendation, I too will not be supporting the once a month council meeting. I'm not comfortable getting there, although I know we're trying to streamline things through the consent agenda and how we adopt the reports from the standing committees. So with that said, then I'm going to call the vote on the first recommendation, which is that standing committees meet once a month, reporting into one council meeting to be held at the end of the month. All in favor? Opposed? And it's defeated. Do you want to deal with the alternate?
We're at standing committee level, so we can, if you like, or I can bring it forward as a recommendation when I bring the staff report to council. Either, yeah.
Okay, so it'll come forward at the next council meeting as an alternate recommendation in the wake of that vote. So the second item that we need to vote on is the council standing committee and its local boards and advisory committees recess for the month of August. Any comments on that? Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question. I just wanted to confirm that that I read correctly in the report that this is standard or common practice in our other municipalities to take this break during the month of August.
Through the chair to the committee, yes. Actually, there's many levels of government that recess for the entire summer. So we are we find that splitting the meetings up throughout the summer months, it doesn't provide people with the proper break that they might need to take vacation with their families or when not being council or staff, and just limited number of people available for the meetings.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
So follow up to that, we use the word committees and boards, so would it be applicable to the boards that the council members sit on? Like, would we have jurisdiction over the BIA to sit or not sit for the month of August?
Through chair to the committee, that would be a recommendation, and we could build that into their establishing bylaws. Most committees don't meet in the month of August anyway. I think maybe the BIA board is the only one typically that would, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brennan?
Thank you, Mayor Sanderson. I don't have any problem with this. I just don't want to assume that should the CAO deem that there's, or remember that something substantive needs to be dealt with in August, this doesn't prohibit us from calling meeting for those purposes.
Through the chair to the committee, absolutely. If there's an urgent matter that comes up, we can always call an emergency meeting at any time.
Councillor Jeffrey?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, because in terms of development and operations and developers and the things that come up, I know the last time as a council, in one of my tenures, I think 06 to 10, we tried taking an entire month off, and we kept having developer situations coming up and us, and we ended up having to call meetings to deal with them anyway. So I think it puts a little pressure on staff to anticipate all the developers' needs, because that was the one department I think that had trouble getting through an entire month. I don't know if Director Farr would speak to that, if he's comfortable with it, that it's the only thing in my mind that would prohibit taking an entire month.
Director Farr?
I think that, through the chair, Councillor Jeffrey, I think that there are going to be time-specific development rise regardless of that month. Some municipalities that do take that additional time off end up adapting, and the developers end up adapting to the break. What it is likely to mean is that there'll be more pressure before and after. I think once adopted and people become used to it, special meetings of council, if they require, will become the exception, not the norm. That's my experience.
That's it. Okay.
If I could add, if these changes were to take place, we'd make sure there was good communication and put out to all the developers so they are aware of that lack in meeting space, and hopefully they can accommodate their applications beforehand.
I think we've had good discussion, so I'm going to call a vote then on the second recommendation dealing with the recess for the month of August. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. The next series of recommendations have to do with the notice of meetings. And the recommendations are that meeting agendas for standing committee and council meetings be published not less than 96 hours before the start time of the meeting. And correspondence received that is specific to an item of the agenda after the agenda has been published shall be circulated to all members of council prior to the meeting. And I'm going to move her and second her for those two. Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor McLeod. Comments or questions, council? Councillor McLeod.
I am not going to be voting in support of this motion. When I decided that I was going to move into public service, I read my procedural bylaw and knew what I was in for. And I knew that I would have 72 hours. I knew that I would be giving up weekends to read my agenda. And I'm cool with that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Sanderson. Yeah, I would echo what Councillor McLeod said. I thought 72 hours was plenty, and I think some of you know around the table I'm kind of a junkie for this stuff before I ever got on council. So it's out Thursday. I typically pick it up right on time, and I've done my work by the end of Friday. But what I think part of the problem that stems off of this is that if we're not all issues that are coming up via email, answers from staff that are coming up so close to the time that we meet that we can't properly do our due diligence on those responses. So I know it doesn't really address it here, but I think 72 hours is fine, and I think we've, as Councillor McLeod said, all made a commitment to do our work responsibly so that it helps everybody out.
Thank you, Councillor Hammond.
I guess I'm shocked. Well, I mean, it was sorry. I don't know why we wouldn't want to have as much time as possible to look at this information. I know a lot of municipalities, the staff gets the agenda out a week before the meetings. They have, you know, for myself, you know, I get the agenda Friday. Sometime I'll come in and get it from the office. I have a lot of other meetings, I'm juggling all the time. I do spend all weekend reading this stuff and talking to people. But I find then it's Monday, the meeting's Monday night, and I've got to ask questions of staff, and I've got questions from residents that have come in, I'm trying to ask through staff. And, you know, we're coming down to the wire sometimes at these meetings. You know, if it was up to me, the recommendation would be that we get these agendas a week before the meetings. To me, that is what makes sense. I would support a 96-hour window, which means we get it one day earlier. It does not seem to be a hardship to staff from where they wouldn't be recommending it. I would also like to make an amendment, and I don't know if this is the right time because I'm bad at procedural things, but I would like this to also specifically include in-camera meetings. And if this is something I should be bringing up at a separate meeting under other business, I'm happy to do so. But what's on my mind with respect to in-camera meetings is I think that we need as a council more information before we walk into in-camera sessions. I feel that the information we get is the same that goes to the public, which is basically listing that there's an in-camera meeting. And I would like to be able to have written reports, opinions from lawyers if we're talking about settling matters, and so on, that we can review before we go in to discuss and vote on matters. I understand these are confidential things, and I know some municipalities set up some secure way where a councillor could go in, and in some municipalities, if it's really secretive, you go in and just sit in the CAO's office and read it. But I find coming into these in-camera sessions blind, I don't feel like I'm giving my best efforts to how these things are resolved. So I don't know if it's sufficient to ask for an amendment to this saying that the meeting agendas for standing committees and council meetings, including in-camera sessions, be published at least 96 hours before. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Hammond. I'm not going to treat that as an amendment. What I think I'll do is we'll deal first with this motion, and then if you want to put that on the table and you have a seconder, then we can deal with the in-camera aspect of it. Okay? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. I did want to speak specifically to the 96 hours and then also to Councillor Hammond's concern, which I actually share with regards to in-camera. So I can speak to the latter later if you like, or both.
Yeah, let's wait till we have that motion.
So specific to 96 hours, it's a staff recommendation, so I wholeheartedly would accept the additional time and support it.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So for me, I mean, whether it's 72 hours or 96, I'm great with either. I just want to make sure that for the acting clerk that will still work in her new proposal for the meetings going forward, that we'll consider at a later point.
Through the chair to Councillor Jeffrey, as long as we can go with an alternative schedule, it will work. Right now, the issue again is the timing it takes from going to standing committee to council and the agenda. So as long as I can stagger those meetings, then I would be fine with that. So then I guess the next question is it prudent to vote on this or defer it until we actually vote on what that meeting sequence is going to be?
well, I guess any vote we have today will have to be ratified by the council when this recommendation comes forward. So I don't know that we necessarily need to defer, but I think you raise an excellent point. And I guess what's hinging on this vote for the 96 hours is, do you want to have the schedule change to be 2 standing committee meetings back to back and then 2 council meetings back to back? If you would rather stagger them, then I think the 96 hours is not feasible, is what I understand from the clerk. Okay.
I was quite prepared to deal with the new clerk's alternate. I think it works really, really well, and it's one I had in my head. I'd be happy to do the recommendation today so they can both go to council if procedurally it works for them.
Well, I think I take your point. Staff indicated preference that it come back under the report from the SIC meeting, but I certainly, if that's your position, then it would affect your vote on this issue. So, under 96 hours, if you're content with that. So, you can marry the two that way. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Collingwood.
Mr. Mayor, can I kindly ask for clarification, because I couldn't quite follow what was the exchange between you and the acting clerk about this 96 hours and a possible updated schedule. Thank you.
I'll let the clerk explain.
Through the chair to the thing, yeah. So this recommendation of the 96 hours is doable, but it's very difficult for staff right now because we only have 1 day to turn material around from a standing committee to a council agenda. So that's where our difficulty is in moving the agenda issue date up another day. Should we stagger the committees so we have the standing committees on the first 2 Mondays and the council meetings on the following 2 Mondays of the month, then we have a whole week in between to prepare the agenda material for the next agenda.
But we're not considering that right now, but we have to file that away as we look at this request.
So the motion that's in front of you right now is for the 96 hours.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Actually not quite related to that motion, I'm sorry, but I just am twigging on what the deputy clerk has just reinforced about the timing. And I really don't see a reason why we could not vote on the alternate schedule recommendation as the deputy clerk has put forward. Then our next decision would fall directly out of that.
I appreciate your input, and I guess what I said in my exchange with Councillor Jeffrey is that you're going to vote one way or the other on both of those. So when you make your vote on this issue, you'll know what you're going to do on the other. And staff's recommendation, which I've accepted, is that we will come back with a recommendation on the council meeting next Monday. Okay? Thanks. Any other questions or comments before I call the vote? All in favor then of the meeting agendas for the standing committee and council meetings being published not less than 96 hours before the start of the time of the meeting, and correspondence received that is specific to an item of the agenda after the agenda has been published shall be circulated to all members of council prior to the meeting. All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Length of meetings. The recommendation is that a member of council. The first one is
It was, I believe, was it separated? That was, sorry, you guys are really confusing.
So length of meetings. So the recommendation is that a member of council be permitted to request a recess through the chair at any point in the meeting. The chair shall have discretion to accept a request, the length of the recess being called, and whether timing of the recess is appropriate as to not interrupt a matter currently being considered by council. Okay, mover and seconder. Councillor Doherty. We can do this. We need one more hand in the air so we can talk about it. Thank you, Councillor Coleman. Questions or comments? Councillor Madigan.
Just for clarification, at any time in the meeting, a member of council can get up and leave the chambers to attend to a personal bio break or a phone call or a personal matter, and they don't need permission through the chair, they can just get up and excuse themselves respectfully?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Berman?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I think, you did it during this meeting where you called a recess after the one thing. I'm just wondering, I agree with this in principle, I just wonder if it's necessary to, it feels a little like kindergarten when you're asking to go to the bathroom, if we can just trust the chair to call a recess if he feels that there's one necessary.
It's possible. I don't have a problem with it. It's just an opportunity for a council member to make a request if I'm not paying attention. So it's okay with me. Councillor Coney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This was, I guess, picking up on Councillor Mack and Berman, just trying to clarify in my own mind. Up till now, are we saying that a council member has not been permitted to make such a request during a meeting of council to, or committee to the chair?
Through the chair, a committee member can make the request at any time. This just kind of formalizes that process. So there's something in the procedural bylaw, should someone want to follow up on it.
Oh, I see. Okay, so there, while it's been generally accepted, it hasn't been formalized as existing as right.
That's correct, and that's with a lot of the recommendations that are coming forward, just formalizing the process.
Okay, so a little bit, could we view this through the lens of a little bit of housekeeping? Just putting something there that isn't in place rather than, I think perhaps I share fellow councillors' concerns about what has caused this to appear suddenly. Are people feeling impeded in their ability to request a break or?
Through the chair to the committee, we did receive some requests to have something formally recognized.
Okay, thank you.
This is here today.
All right, seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? No. Start of the meetings. Recommendation is that to maintain the current start time of standing committee and council meetings at 5 p.m. unless otherwise determined by the mayor and clerk. Can I get a mover and seconder? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Berman. Questions or comments? Okay, if there aren't any questions or comments, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? And that is carried. Approval of standing committee reports and supporting reports of the minutes. The recommendation is that the standing committee report and all recommendations therein be considered in a single motion at a council meeting. Any member of council may request an item from the standing committee report be pulled from the report and discussed separately from the main motion, similar to the way we now operate our consent agenda. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor McLeod. Questions or comments, Council? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. In my mind, I think if the vote is not unanimous at the committee, it's going to get pulled anyway because there is a dissenter who has questions and is going to bring up a point of view. It would make sense to me if all of the items from a committee that had been unanimously passed that committee would go into a consent agenda as opposed to everything from that meeting. I just think the fact you have a dissenter, someone's going to want to speak to it, and I think it's probably saved the whole process of I want to pull that, I want to pull that, I want to pull that. Let's just put the unanimous ones in. That's my point.
So are you proposing an amendment?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to go around the table first, and then I'll come back for a second. Any other questions or comments, Council? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. How will we deal with bylaws if all of the reports coming out of standing committee are going into a consent agenda because some of those matters do generate a bylaw?
I'll let the clerk answer that.
Through the chair, so these would also be included in the consent agenda. This is done at the county level with all of their standing committee reports, and it functions quite efficiently. We do have in our procedural bylaw right now that we could do a consent agenda for all bylaws, so we just haven't been fulfilling that practice. Once in a while, you'll see one come through. We have a bunch of committee member appointments. Instead of having to read each of them out, we have one motion approving all the bylaws, work in the same fashion.
Thank you.
Councillor Hammond.
I just had wanted a clarification on the amendment. Councillor Jeffrey's suggesting, and that was, can a member of council would still be able to request an item be pulled? Yeah.
I think everyone would have that opportunity. I think what Councillor Jeffrey was just suggesting is things that come through the standing committee unanimously would go on the consent agenda. Well, I'm going to look for you to get a second, and then Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Comey. So the amendment is then that the standing committee report and all recommendations therein be considered in standing committee report and all unanimous recommendations therein be considered in a single motion at a council meeting. Does that work? All right. So is there any further discussion about the amendment before I call the vote? Seeing none then, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried. Providing direction to staff. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so then the main motion, going back then as amended, so that just means the inclusion of the word all unanimous recommendations. So I will call the vote on that. All in favor? And that is also carried unanimously. The next recommendation is that requests for staff reports or direction to staff shall be provided to the clerk not less than 24 hours prior to publishing the agenda for the meeting the request is to be considered at. The request must be submitted on the prescribed form and identifying how the item aligns with the strategic priorities set by council or items identified in the budget. It will be included as a motion on the agenda. And I get a mover and a seconder to get that on the floor. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Doherty. Comments or questions, Council? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Somerson. Just I guess a clarification. It seems that a number of requests for staff reports come as a result of what's on the agenda. So this is not saying that we have to request a staff report 24 hours before we even see the agenda. Is that correct? And does that mean it would be a delay then and anything that's on the agenda we couldn't ask for till the next meeting?
I'll look to the Deputy Clerk.
So through the chair to the committee, the intent of this is to be able to provide the public notice of any requests for staff reports. So if there was an item that you were discussing at a council agenda that you would like to be moved forward to a staff report, then yeah, it would still follow through this process because he wouldn't be providing notice to the public or to staff or the rest of your council members of that recommendation.
See you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The other comment I would add to what the acting clerk said is that items that have a fiscal impact need to be identified. The challenge we have sometimes is that putting an item on council's floor without and voting on spending money, not knowing where that money is coming from, is often problematic. I think we did that today. So this is a caution as well that if there are going to be financial implications, we need to understand where the revenue is going to come from, or whether or not we're going to cut something to fund that new request.
Thank you. Councillor Hammond.
It may transpire during the course of a council meeting and reviewing of the agenda and discussions that it's timely to have a staff report and that there's not significant financial implications. What would be council's option at that time if they wish to proceed with a staff report vote?
Deputy Clerk.
Through the chair to the committee, there's always the option to waive procedural requirements for notice. It's not recommended to do so, but it's always there.
Deputy Mayor.
That was my point, that for a lot of these items, there is still the opportunity for somebody to raise and request that the process be waived. As the Deputy Clerk referred, it's maybe not best practice, but it's still there.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. My comments will relate to this particular item and will also relate to general consent agenda items. And my concern is the use of the concept that staff would vet a request for either a staff report or for an item to be pulled from the consent agenda. To me, that's suggesting that staff are to some degree actually participating in the political process, and I think that that's inappropriate. I understand the notion of providing notice as a courtesy and to allow staff to react, but the notion of vetting a council member's intent, that gives me cause for concern.
Through you, Your Worship, the recommendation does not include the word vet. If you look at the recommendation, and the intention of vetting is not to second guess the councillor's motion, but provide advice on how best to carry forward that motion. Often that's the best practice now. If a councillor is requesting a staff report or wants to bring forward a motion, the best practice is that they consult with staff provide advice on how best to move that motion forward. We're here to provide advice and to help get things through council, not to second guess members of council.
Does that clarify? Follow up, Councillor Doherty?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for those comments. The word vet actually is included in the recommendation for general consent agenda items, so that's where I was pulling that phrase from.
Well, I guess the point is, at least on this item that we're dealing with right now, it's not that. It's just notice. It mentions it in the report for the reasons that CAO just outlined. Councillor Coney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just picking up on Councillor Doherty's comments, and I did note the word vet in the preamble to this recommendation, and it did cause me concern as well. So just to clarify, absolutely then, that if a council member uses the form, uses the process as a heads up and courtesy to staff, that regardless of staff's position or regardless of the council member's ability to align their request with current positioning of the council's priorities, that their request will still come before council and appear on the agenda regardless.
I'll be at peace, but I'll have to see that.
Yeah, through your worship. Again, the intention here is not to veto or not second guess, not to prevent council from bringing a motion before council. The intention is to help the council get that item on the agenda in a way that is practical and subscribe to good public policy and public finance practices.
So then 100% yes, that the request would appear on the agenda following said process, not subject to any further vetting.
I think as what we've been trying to work on this with this council is when you have a request to talk to staff so that you're getting the proper wording and so you're accomplishing what it is you want to set out and staff knows what you want to go, so that when you make the request, it's in a wording that everyone understands. It's not a question of pre-screening or eliminating requests.
Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I think part of the problem is, as our procedural bylaw has allowed us to simply request a staff report at any time in the process without notice, and I thought the simplest way to fix this would be simply to require notice for the request for a staff report as well. I regret voting in favor of the media form. So I'm not sure, I understand where staff are coming, they want to understand the rationale behind the request for the staff report, but I think that's handled much better with a conversation, and that the notice of motion would give time for the council member to confer with staff before they proceed with their request at the next meeting. So, my input.
Councillor Cloud.
If I'm to understand what Councillor Jeffrey has just suggested, perhaps we should move a severing of this motion as well to remove the submitting of a form. So I would make that motion right now to sever this motion in half with the request must be submitted on a prescribed form, identifying how the item aligns with the strategic priorities as a second item for consideration.
Okay. So So then we'll call the vote on the first sentence then, which is that requests for staff reports or direction to staff shall be provided to the clerk not less than 24 hours prior to publishing the agenda for the meeting the request is to be considered at. All in favor? Opposed? So noted. And the second portion is that the request must be submitted on the prescribed form and identifying how the item aligns with the strategic priorities set by council or items identified in the budget. It will be included as a motion on the agenda. All in favor? Opposed? Sorry, Councillor Berman, you were in favor? Okay. That is defeated, that portion. General consent agenda items. The recommendations are that general consent items considered at the most timely meeting to ensure they are dealt with as efficiently and effectively as possible. These items may be added to or deferred to a standing committee if it is felt that the item is not urgent, should be debated at the level with recommendations from the standing committee provided to council for consideration or the most timely and effective manner. The second recommendation is that notice be provided to CAO and the clerk 24 hours in advance of the meeting if a member of council wishes to pull an item from the consent correspondence agenda for further direction. The item would be vetted and council would be notified as soon as practical prior to the meeting. I think a mover and seconder. Councillor Byrne, Deputy Mayor. Comments or questions on these items? Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Mayor Sanderson. That's the second one where it says the item would be vetted by. Is that would that be by the CAO? Can someone clarify this?
We'll expunge that word vetted from our vocabulary. But the intention again is not to second guess or not to scrutinize unnecessarily or prevent an item from getting on the agenda. If the requisite notice requirement is met, then I think the item will be pulled. Again, the intention here is to try and give staff a heads up so we can come to council prepared to have that discussion. Very often, sometimes an item gets pulled, and there are so many items on the consent agenda that staff may or may not be as prepared as you'd like to have that discussion. So this would ensure that we have all the requisite information to be able to respond in a very fulsome way to requests, rather than sort of putting the item on the floor of council and then asking staff to respond at that time. So again, this is meant to be helpful, both to council and to staff.
Thank you. I did find it helpful. I don't have a problem with the word vetted. I was just looking to who was going to do it. If I may, and maybe the acting clerk could tell me if I'm right or wrong with this, this seems to be somewhat of an enhancement to the existing procedural bylaw about consent agendas, which always sort of confused me because the wording as it exists talks about members of council pulling the items for an alternative direction to a staff recommendation or for further debate. It doesn't really have the language in there of what I've watched for several years is just for pulling items for the sake of talking about them. So I think that this to me is good. The wording that's here is it's so that staff can be prepared and so that it's discussed for the right reasons. Am I correct somewhat that that's where you were going with this?
Through the judge, if you may, yes, that's right.
Doing nice. Just point of clarification to the deputy clerk. I know often I will get correspondence from the ministry fairly late in the day, and I don't know if it gets added. Certainly, it's close to the 24 hours. If it's not within 24 hours, it would just go to the next meeting.
Through the chair to the committee, so the agenda would have already been issued by now, unless it was an urgent matter that would require an addendum to be added to the agenda. It would fall under this
questions? I will call the vote. All in favor? Yes, they are, Tina.
Sorry. We're voting on recommendation 1 out of this?
No one's separate. If you would like to